The knock came at midnight on Christmas Eve. Not from a neighbor, not from family, but from the woman who signed his paychecks. Daniel Brooks opened the door to find his CEO standing in the hallway, evening gown glittering under fluorescent lights, mascara smudged, hands trembling. Evelyn Hart, the untouchable executive who commanded boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, looked terrified. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. In that moment, every boundary between power and vulnerability, employer and employee, shattered. This is the story of two people who discovered that loneliness doesn't discriminate, and that sometimes the most unexpected connections happen when we're stripped of everything we hide behind. If you're watching from anywhere in the world tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe that real human connection can happen in the most unlikely moments, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. The apartment was too quiet. Daniel Brooks had grown accustomed to silence over the past 3 years, but Christmas Eve had a particular quality of emptiness that never quite settled right. The small artificial tree in the corner blinked its colored lights in mechanical rhythm, casting red and green shadows across walls that desperately needed repainting. On the coffee table sat a plate of cookies he'd baked with his son 2 days ago, now covered in plastic wrap, uneaten. Tommy was spending Christmas Eve with Daniel's sister in Connecticut. 8 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with dinosaurs, and already too wise about loss. Daniel had insisted on the arrangement. His sister had kids Tommy's age, a big house, the kind of Christmas chaos that made holidays feel less like survival exercises. But now, at 11:47 on Christmas Eve, Daniel sat alone on a couch that had seen better decades, watching a basketball game he didn't care about, the volume low enough that he could pretend the neighbors might drop by. They never did. Daniel was 35, looked 40 on bad days, and felt 50 most mornings, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. He worked facilities management at Meridian Industries, a tech conglomerate housed in a gleaming tower downtown, where people like him, the ones who fixed leaks and changed light bulbs and made sure the important people never had to think about infrastructure, remained functionally invisible. He'd been there 6 years, good benefits, stable paycheck. The kind of job you kept because you had a kid who needed braces and college funds and a future that didn't include his father's mistakes. His phone sat face down on the armrest. He'd already called Tommy twice, once at bedtime, once an hour later when his sister texted that Tommy was too excited to sleep. His son's voice had been bright, full of anticipation about Santa and presents and cousins. Daniel had smiled through the conversation, made all the right dad noises, then hung up and stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes. The documentary about his late wife sat unwatched in his streaming queue. 3 years since the accident, 3 years of physical therapy appointments and funeral arrangements and learning how to braid hair from YouTube videos. 3 years of becoming both mother and father, of packing lunches and attending parent-teacher conferences and explaining over and over why mommy wasn't coming back. He'd gotten good at it. The performance, the smile that said everything was fine, the competence that made other parents assume he had it figured out. Tonight, with no one watching, he didn't bother. The knock came at 11:58. Daniel's first thought was that he'd imagined it. The building was old enough that pipes knocked, floors settled, sounds traveled through walls in unpredictable ways. But then it came again. 3 deliberate raps against hollow wood, urgent but not aggressive. He stood slowly, joints protesting. Probably Mrs. Chen from 4B locked out again, or maybe building maintenance with some emergency about frozen pipes. He crossed the small living room in sock feet, not bothering with the peephole because the hallway light had been broken for 2 weeks, and he kept forgetting to replace it himself. When Daniel opened the door, the world tilted slightly off its axis. Evelyn Hart stood in his doorway. Not a photograph of Evelyn Hart, not a woman who resembled the CEO. The actual Evelyn Hart, 6 feet tall in heels, wearing a midnight blue evening gown that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, diamonds at her throat catching the dim hallway light. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement that had started to come loose, and her makeup, professionally applied, he assumed, was smudged beneath eyes that looked simultaneously fierce and frightened. Daniel's brain stalled somewhere between recognition and incomprehension. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and her voice carried none of the controlled authority he'd heard in the 3 board meetings he'd attended to discuss HVAC upgrades. It was raw, slightly breathless, almost apologetic. I'm sorry to... I didn't mean to... She stopped, seemed to gather herself, then tried again. May I come in? Daniel stepped aside before his conscious mind caught up with the action. Evelyn Hart walked into his apartment, evening gown whispering against the door frame, and stood in the center of his living room looking utterly displaced, like a Fabergé egg in a thrift store, like a creature from one world who'd accidentally crossed into another and hadn't yet figured out the rules. He closed the door carefully, buying himself 3 seconds to process. Through the thin walls, he could hear the Martinez family's television, someone's grandmother laughing. Normal sounds. A normal Christmas Eve, except for the billionaire CEO, currently standing next to his second-hand coffee table. Ms. Hart, Daniel said, his customer service voice activating automatically. Is everything all right? Do you need me to call someone? She turned to face him, and for the first time since he'd started working at Meridian Industries, he saw her as something other than an institution. She was maybe 40, maybe older, the kind of woman who'd learned to weaponize competence and elegance so effectively that age became irrelevant. But right now, in his living room, she looked exhausted and uncertain and startlingly human. I was at the Hamilton Gala, she said, then laughed, a short, brittle sound. Obviously, I'm wearing... She gestured at herself, the movement sharp. There was a car, following my town car. I told my driver to keep going, not to stop, and when we got to Lexington and 43rd, I told him to pull over. I got out. She met his eyes. I walked 11 blocks. In these. She lifted one foot slightly, showing a heel that could probably double as a weapon. I don't know why I came here. I saw your building, and I remembered you live here. You put this address on the facility's request forms. Daniel had filled out hundreds of those forms, work orders, maintenance schedules, emergency contacts, standard paperwork that nobody important ever looked at. But apparently Evelyn Hart had. Apparently she'd filed away the address of a man who fixed her company's air conditioning. You thought someone was following you, Daniel said carefully, so you came to my apartment. I panicked. She said it simply, without decoration. I've had security since the Lextech merger. Threats, mostly empty. But tonight there was a car and it stayed 3 lengths back for 20 blocks. And she stopped, inhaled slowly. I panicked, and you were the first person I thought of who felt safe. The word landed between them like something fragile. Safe. Daniel Brooks, who nobody at Meridian Industries noticed unless something was broken. Daniel Brooks, who'd perfected the art of professional invisibility. Safe. Would you like to sit down? He heard himself ask. Evelyn nodded, then lowered herself onto his couch with the careful grace of someone accustomed to being watched. The evening gown pooled around her, absurdly beautiful against worn upholstery. Daniel remained standing, aware suddenly of his faded Knicks t-shirt, his jeans with the frayed hem, the hole in his left sock. The apartment that had felt merely small now felt actively shabby. Water stains on the ceiling, the kitchen visible through a doorway that had never had a proper door, Tommy's drawings taped to the refrigerator alongside overdue bills. Can I get you something? Daniel asked. Water? He mentally inventoried his kitchen. Coffee? Tea. There might be whiskey somewhere. Water would be fine. Thank you. He escaped to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with his hands, filled a glass from the tap, his Brita pitcher had died last month, and tried to think of a single rational explanation for what was happening. His boss. His CEO. In his apartment. On Christmas Eve. Because she felt safe. When he returned, she'd removed her heels and was examining one of Tommy's drawings, a crayon masterpiece depicting what appeared to be a T-Rex fighting a volcano. Your son? She asked. Tommy. He's 8. Daniel handed her the water, remained standing because sitting felt presumptuous. He's with my sister tonight. Christmas tradition. Evelyn studied the drawing with what appeared to be genuine interest. He's talented. The composition is quite sophisticated for his age. She looked up at Daniel. You're raising him alone. It wasn't a question. Another piece of information she'd somehow collected, filed away, remembered. His mother died 3 years ago, Daniel said, the sentence smooth from repetition. Car accident. We're managing. I'm sorry. She set the drawing down carefully, exactly where she'd found it. I can't imagine raising a child alone. You find ways to adapt. Daniel finally sat, choosing the armchair perpendicular to the couch, maintaining professional distance in a situation that had obliterated any pretense of professionalism. Ms. Hart, I want to help, but I'm not sure what you need. Should I call your driver? Security? No. The word came quickly, almost harsh, then softer. Not yet. I just need... She wrapped both hands around the water glass, didn't drink. I need to not be Evelyn Hart for a few minutes. Is that something you can understand? Daniel understood more than she probably expected. He understood the performance of competence, the exhaustion of maintaining faces for people who needed you to be certain things. He understood the weight of roles that didn't leave room for weakness or doubt. I understand, he said quietly. She nodded, seemed to relax fractionally. Outside, a church bell tolled midnight. Christmas had arrived technically, mechanically, without fanfare. Evelyn turned toward the sound, moonlight from the window catching the diamonds at her throat. I left the gala mid-speech, she said, almost to herself. The mayor was introducing me. 500 people in formal wear, cameras, journalists. I was supposed to announce our new scholarship initiative. Instead, I walked off the stage, found my driver, and ran. She laughed again, that brittle sound. The board is probably having collective apoplexy. Why? Daniel asked. Not why did you leave? He thought he understood that, but why were you so afraid? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weariness that made her seem suddenly older. Because for 23 years, I've built everything on control. Perfect strategy, calculated risks, managed outcomes. I run a company worth $8 billion. I employ 17,000 people. I've negotiated mergers that made grown men cry and come out smiling. She met his eyes. And tonight a car followed mine for 20 blocks, and I completely fell apart. That's not falling apart, Daniel said. That's being human. Is it? She set the water glass on the coffee table untouched. Or is it weakness? Because in my world, there's no functional difference. Daniel thought about the last 3 years. The nights he'd sat in hospital waiting rooms pretending he had answers. The mornings he'd packed Tommy's lunch with hands that shook from exhaustion. The parent-teacher conferences where he'd nodded and smiled and taken notes while internally screaming that he had no idea what he was doing. Weakness is pretending you don't need help, he said. Being human is knowing when you do. Evelyn looked at him, really looked. Not the polite attention of a superior acknowledging a subordinate, but the direct gaze of someone reassessing their understanding. You don't talk like a maintenance supervisor. I don't? No. You talk like someone who's thought about this, who's lived it. Daniel shrugged. I had a full scholarship to Cornell, engineering program, met my wife sophomore year, got married junior year, had Tommy senior year, dropped out to take a job that had health insurance. He kept his tone neutral, factual. Sometimes you make choices that close doors. That's not weakness. That's life. Do you regret it? The question was too direct for polite conversation, too personal for employee-employer dynamics. But those rules had dissolved somewhere around the time Evelyn Hart walked into his apartment in an evening gown. I regret that my son won't remember his mother, Daniel said. I regret that I couldn't prevent that. The rest, he gestured at the apartment himself, the sum total of his reduced ambitions. The rest is just circumstances. You adapt. You keep saying that. Adapt, manage, survive. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Don't you ever want to just... She stopped, searching for words. Break something? Scream? Demand that the universe give you back what it took? Every day, Daniel admitted. But I have an 8-year-old who needs breakfast and clean clothes and someone who doesn't fall apart. So I don't. That must be exhausting. It is. He met her eyes. But I suspect you understand that better than most. Evelyn smiled. Small, genuine, the first real expression he'd seen from her that wasn't filtered through corporate polish. I do, she said quietly. I really do. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Outside, the city hummed its endless nighttime rhythm. A siren wailed in the distance. Someone's music thumped through the floor, bass-heavy and muffled. Christmas in New York, continuing whether anyone was paying attention or not. "Tell me something," Evelyn said eventually. "When you look at me at work, at Meridian, what do you see?" Daniel considered lying, offering the polite fiction, but she'd come here for honesty, whether she'd articulated it that way or not. "I see someone who's built an empire on being untouchable," he said. "Someone brilliant and ruthless and probably very lonely. Someone who can't afford to let anyone see cracks." He paused. "I see someone exhausting themselves trying to be perfect." Evelyn absorbed this without flinching. "And now? Right now, what do you see?" "Someone who's tired of performing?" She nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. Relief, maybe, or recognition. "Yes, exactly that." "Why did you really come here, Daniel asked. "Not the car, not the panic. Why my apartment? Why me?" Evelyn looked down at her hands, diamonds glittering on her fingers, rings that probably represented quarterly earnings for most people. "Last month you filed a work order about the executive floor thermostats. The temperature variance was affecting employees on the lower floors, colder offices for people who couldn't complain to anyone who mattered. You didn't have to notice that. Facilities management isn't responsible for environmental justice." She looked up. "But you noticed anyway. You documented it. You fixed it." Daniel remembered. Had cost him a weekend and several arguments with the HVAC contractors who insisted the system was functioning within parameters. "It was an inefficiency," he said. "It was compassion." Evelyn's voice was firm. "You saw people who were uncomfortable and you helped them, even though they'd never know you did it, even though there was no recognition, no reward. You just helped." She smiled that small, genuine smile again. "So when I needed to feel safe, when I needed someone who wouldn't judge me for being weak, I thought of the man who fixes problems no one else notices." Daniel didn't know what to say to that. In his experience, being noticed was usually a prelude to being blamed. But this didn't feel like blame. It felt like something more fragile, trust, offered without guarantee. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," he said carefully. "I don't have answers, Ms. Hart. I'm just—" "Evelyn," she interrupted. "Here, tonight, I'm just Evelyn. Not the CEO, not the board chair, not the Harvard Business School case study. Just a person who made a mistake and needs somewhere to exist without consequences." "All right," Daniel said. "Evelyn." The name felt strange in his mouth, too personal, too real. "Then I'm Daniel, and you can stay as long as you need." She exhaled, tension bleeding from her shoulders. "Thank you." They sat in silence again, but it felt different now, less weighted with uncertainty, more companionable. The basketball game had ended at some point, replaced by late-night reruns. Daniel's coffee table held the debris of his evening, a half-read mystery novel, Tommy's toy stegosaurus, the plate of cookies still wrapped in plastic. "May I?" Evelyn gestured at the cookies. "Please, they're probably stale, but I haven't eaten since breakfast." She unwrapped the plate carefully, selected a cookie shaped like a Christmas tree, took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. "These are good, really good. Tommy and I made them. Well, Tommy decorated while I tried to prevent structural collapse." "You baked these?" She sounded surprised. "Why is that shocking?" "Because in my world, men like you—" She stopped, reconsidered. "Actually, I don't know any men like you. The men I know have personal chefs and meal plans and assistants who handle anything domestic." "Must be nice," Daniel said, without rancor. "I have a grocery list held to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a chicken. Very sophisticated operation." Evelyn laughed, a real laugh this time, warm and unguarded. "I have 17 assistants, and I couldn't tell you the last time I was in my own kitchen. My penthouse has a sub-zero refrigerator that cost more than some cars. I don't think I've ever opened it." "That seems inefficient." "Everything about my life is inefficient when you examine it closely." She ate another bite of cookie, considering. "I own 4 homes. I'm never in any of them long enough to consider them home. I have a closet full of evening gowns for events I don't want to attend. I know the names of every board member's spouse and children, but I can't remember the last time someone asked me how I was doing and actually wanted an answer. Daniel heard the loneliness beneath the words, the same loneliness he carried, just furnished more expensively. "It's Christmas Eve," he said quietly. "How are you doing, Evelyn?" She met his eyes, and for a moment he saw past the CEO, past the armor of success and control, to something raw and honest underneath. "I'm exhausted," she admitted. "I'm 42 years old and I've achieved everything I set out to achieve, and I'm so tired I can barely remember why I wanted any of it." She set the half-eaten cookie down carefully. "I built this empire. Meridian Industries didn't exist when I started. It was just me and a business plan and a loan I shouldn't have qualified for. 23 years later, we're multinational, influential, important." She paused. "And tonight, at that gala, standing on that stage with everyone watching, I suddenly couldn't remember what any of it was for." "What do you mean?" "I mean," she gestured, frustrated with the inadequacy of language. "I've sacrificed relationships, family, any possibility of children because I was always too busy building the next quarter's growth. I've made decisions that affected thousands of lives, and I made them alone because that's what leaders do. And tonight, looking at all those people in their formal wear, applauding my success, I realized I didn't know a single person in that room. Not really, not in any way that mattered." "That's why you ran," Daniel said, understanding. "That's why I ran." She looked around his small apartment, at Tommy's drawings, at the well-worn furniture, at the evidence of a life built on modest means and enormous love. "You have so much less than I do. In every measurable way, I'm more successful, but you have a son who draws you pictures. You have cookies you bake together. You have—" She stopped, voice catching slightly. "You have a home, not a property, not an investment, a home." Daniel thought about the nights he'd sat in this apartment, drowning in grief and responsibility, convinced he was failing at everything. The mornings he'd wanted to quit, to surrender, to admit he couldn't do this alone. The countless moments when home had felt like a prison of inadequate resources and impossible demands. But Evelyn was right. For all its flaws, it was home. It was where Tommy felt safe, where they'd grieved together and healed together, and built a life that might not be impressive by any external measure, but was undeniably theirs. "It's not perfect," he said. "Most days it's barely functional, but it's ours." "That's everything I don't have." Evelyn's voice was quiet, honest. "Everything I didn't know I wanted until I was standing on that stage, about to announce another initiative that would look good on paper and mean nothing in practice. I'm 42 years old and I've forgotten how to be anything except successful." Daniel understood the trap of performance, the exhaustion of maintaining faces. But he also understood something else, something he'd learned in hospital waiting rooms and late-night conversations with his son when monsters seemed real. "You're human," he said simply. "That's not something you have to remember. It's what you are, whether you acknowledge it or not. But I've spent so long pretending." "Then stop pretending. Here, tonight, you don't have to be anything except tired and honest and present." He met her eyes. "No one's watching except me, and I don't need you to be impressive." Evelyn stared at him, something shifting in her expression, resistance giving way to something that looked like relief, or maybe surrender. "I don't know how to do that," she admitted. "Neither do I," Daniel said, "but we can figure it out together. For tonight, at least." She nodded slowly, then did something that surprised them both. She started to cry. Not dramatically, not with the polished emotion of someone who'd learned to perform vulnerability. Just quiet tears sliding down her face, mascara smudging further, diamonds at her throat catching the light while she fell apart on his second-hand couch. Daniel didn't offer platitudes or try to fix it. He just handed her the box of tissues from the side table, generic brand, half empty, and let her cry. After a while, when the tears slowed, Evelyn wiped her face carefully and looked at the ruined tissue. "I'm sorry, this isn't professional." "Nothing about tonight is professional," Daniel pointed out gently. "And that's all right." She laughed wetly, nodding. "You're right. You're absolutely right." She dabbed at her eyes again. "My therapist would be thrilled. She's been telling me for years that I need to let someone see me be imperfect." "You have a therapist?" 3, actually. 1 for business stress, 1 for personal development, one who specializes in executive burnout. She smiled ruefully. I approach mental health the way I approach quarterly projections, with maximum efficiency and complete avoidance of actual vulnerability. How's that working out? I'm crying in my maintenance supervisor's apartment on Christmas Eve, so I'd say the ROI is questionable. Daniel smiled despite himself. Well, you're welcome to keep crying here. The tissues are cheap but plentiful. Thank you. She set the tissue aside, seemed to gather herself. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel like you're living the wrong life? Like somewhere along the way you took a turn and ended up somewhere you never intended to be? Daniel considered the question honestly. Every day. But I'm not sure there's a right life. Just the one you're living and what you do with it. That's very zen. That's very exhausted, he corrected. When you're a single parent, you don't have the luxury of existential crisis. You just keep moving. But don't you wonder about the life you could have had? Cornell, engineering, all of it? Sure, but that life would have meant different choices. Maybe I wouldn't have Tommy. Maybe I wouldn't have learned how to braid hair or negotiate with second-grade teachers or make cookies that don't poison people. He shrugged. Those things matter too, maybe more than the alternative. Evelyn absorbed this, turning it over. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, I'm just a guy who gave up his dreams for nothing. You gave up your dreams for your family. That's not nothing. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. They sat with that truth, the clock ticking toward 1 a.m, Christmas Day settling over the city like a blanket. Somewhere in the building, someone was singing, off-key, enthusiastic, probably drunk. The sound drifted through thin walls, oddly comforting. What would you be doing right now, Daniel asked, if you hadn't come here? Evelyn thought about it. Probably still at the gala, or back at my penthouse, alone, reviewing the damage control strategy my PR team is undoubtedly assembling, answering emails, planning tomorrow's crisis management, she paused. Definitely not eating homemade cookies in someone's living room while discussing the meaning of life. Is this better or worse? Honestly, better, much better. She looked at him curiously. What would you be doing? Exactly what I was doing when you knocked. Sitting here, pretending to watch television, counting the hours until I could pick up Tommy and pretend I enjoyed the holiday. You don't enjoy Christmas? I don't enjoy performing happiness when I'm not feeling it. Christmas is just... He searched for words. It's a reminder of what was, what isn't anymore. Your wife. Sarah. Yeah. Her name still felt strange 3 years later, like a word in a language he was forgetting. She loved Christmas, the whole production, decorating, baking, caroling, all of it. She'd start planning in October. Our apartment looked like a Hallmark movie exploded. He smiled at the memory, bittersweet. Now it's just me and Tommy and an artificial tree from CVS. We do our best. But it's not the same. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quietly, that you lost that she's not here. Me too. Daniel looked at the Christmas tree, its mechanical blinking, the presents underneath wrapped in newspaper because he'd forgotten to buy wrapping paper. But Tommy doesn't remember it being different, which is probably a mercy. He thinks this is normal. And maybe it is. Maybe everyone's just pretending that their version of Christmas matches the commercials. Probably, Evelyn agreed. I certainly am. Every year my assistant sends out cards with my signature. I've never actually signed one. I donate to charities I've never visited. I attend parties full of people I don't know. It's very efficient and completely meaningless. Why do it then? Because it's expected. Because successful people have certain obligations. Because if I stopped performing, people might notice I don't actually know how to exist without a script. She met his eyes. Same reason you pretend to enjoy the holiday. Because the alternative is admitting it's hard, and that feels like failure. Is it? Daniel asked. Failure, I mean. To admit things are difficult? In my world? Absolutely. Weakness gets punished. Uncertainty gets exploited. If you're not in complete control, someone's waiting to take advantage. That sounds exhausting. It is. Evelyn leaned back against the couch, closing her eyes briefly. It's so exhausting, and the worst part is I chose this. Every step of the way, I chose ambition over connection, success over vulnerability, control over... She stopped. Over whatever this is. This? She gestured between them, at the space that had somehow become honest and safe. Sitting in a stranger's apartment, eating cookies, telling the truth about how lonely it is at the top. I could have chosen differently at any point, but I didn't. You can choose differently now, Daniel suggested. Can I? I'm 42, I run a multinational corporation. I have responsibilities, obligations, a board that would stage a coup if I suddenly decided to prioritize personal fulfillment over quarterly earnings. I'm not suggesting you quit your job and join a commune, just... Daniel searched for the right words. Maybe make space for things that aren't transactions, people who aren't assets, moments that don't require justification or ROI. Like tonight. Like tonight, he confirmed. Evelyn opened her eyes, studied him with that direct gaze that probably made board members nervous. You're surprisingly wise for a maintenance supervisor. I'm surprisingly tired, he corrected. There's a difference. She smiled. Is there? Because right now, sitting here, I feel like you're the sanest person I've talked to in years. That's a low bar. Maybe, but you're clearing it by a significant margin. She picked up another cookie, examined it. These really are good. Tommy's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him, Daniel said automatically, then realized it was true. For all the difficulty, all the exhaustion, Tommy was the reason he kept going, the reason mornings mattered. He gives me purpose. Without him, I'd probably still be sitting in some sterile apartment, pretending my job defined me. Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of recognition. Yes, probably. My job is everything because I haven't let anything else matter. It's safer that way. Safer how? If you don't let people in, they can't leave, can't die, can't disappoint you. She met his eyes. Can't make you feel things you're not sure you know how to handle. Daniel understood that instinct more than he wanted to admit. After Sarah died, he'd built walls around everything except Tommy. Work became mechanical. Relationships became transactional. He showed up, performed his role, went home. It was safer than risking more loss. But you're also not living, he said quietly. You're just existing, managing, surviving. Like you. Like me, he acknowledged. Which is why I probably shouldn't be giving advice. I'm not exactly a model of emotional health. No, Evelyn agreed. But you're honest about it. That counts for something. The conversation could have gone many directions from there, deeper into philosophy, into comparison, into the competitive suffering that sometimes happened when two lonely people tried to quantify pain. But Daniel was too tired for that, and Evelyn seemed to be arriving at the same conclusion. Can I just sit here for a while? She asked. Not talk about anything important, just exist without agenda. Of course. So they did. Evelyn ate another cookie. Daniel turned the television to some late-night movie he didn't recognize. Black and white, vaguely noir, the kind of thing that played on cable when networks ran out of Christmas specials. They watched without commentary, the plot washing over them like background noise. At some point, Evelyn's posture relaxed completely, her shoulders dropping, her face losing the careful control that probably felt like armor most days. She looked younger suddenly, or maybe just more human, a woman at the end of a difficult night, grateful for a place to stop pretending. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, some recognition of shared experience that transcended the massive gulf in their circumstances. She was lonely. He was lonely. The details differed, but the shape was the same. Two people who'd forgotten how to be seen without performance. Around 2 a.m, Evelyn's phone buzzed. She'd turned it to silent at some point, but the vibration was audible in the quiet apartment. She glanced at the screen, sighed. Your people? Daniel guessed. My assistant. 7th message. She's getting creative with the subject lines. Evelyn set the phone face down without reading the message. They'll survive without me for a few more hours. Will you get in trouble? For disappearing? Probably, but right now I can't bring myself to care. She looked at him. Does that make me irresponsible? It makes you human. Again, she smiled. You keep saying that, like it's a good thing, isn't it? I spent 23 years believing the opposite, that being human was weakness, that emotion was liability, that the only way to succeed was to transcend ordinary limitations. She gestured at herself, the evening gown now wrinkled, the perfect hair coming fully undone. Turns out I was wrong. Everyone's wrong about something. I'm wrong about most things, apparently. Wrong about what success means. Wrong about what I needed. Wrong about whether it's possible to build something meaningful when you're too afraid to let anyone close. You're here, Daniel pointed out. That took courage. That took panic. Same thing sometimes, Evelyn laughed softly. Maybe you're right. Maybe fear and courage are just different names for the same impulse, moving forward when you're terrified of what comes next. They fell quiet again, the movie playing on, neither of them watching. Outside, the city was settling into the deep quiet of Christmas morning, that strange lull when even New York paused, took a breath, pretended for a few hours that peace was possible. Daniel found himself thinking about tomorrow. Tommy would be home by noon, full of stories about his cousins and Santa and whatever chaos his sister's house had produced. Life would resume its familiar patterns, and Evelyn would return to being the untouchable CEO, the woman who signed his paychecks and inhabited a world he could barely imagine. But for now, in this moment, they were just two tired people sitting in a quiet apartment, grateful for the unexpected grace of honest company. It was enough. It had to be. Around 2:30 in the morning, Evelyn stood and walked to the window. Daniel watched her move across the small space, the evening gown catching what little light filtered through from the street below. She stood with her back to him, one hand pressed against the glass, staring at the city that never quite went dark. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "Your wife, Sarah." Daniel hadn't expected the question. Most people avoided mentioning Sarah, as if speaking her name might shatter whatever fragile equilibrium he'd managed to construct. But Evelyn wasn't asking out of polite curiosity. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know, and somehow that made all the difference. "She was a kindergarten teacher," Daniel began, the words coming easier than they had in months. "Obsessed with picture books and finger painting. She could calm down a room full of 5-year-olds with nothing but a guitar and a silly song she'd made up on the spot." He smiled at the memory. "She was terrible at cooking, burned everything. But she tried anyway because she loved the idea of family dinners, even if half of them ended with us ordering pizza." Evelyn turned slightly, listening. "She was small, 5'3" in shoes, and she had this laugh that was completely disproportionate to her size. You could hear her across a crowded restaurant. Tommy has her laugh." His voice caught slightly. "Sometimes I hear him in the other room, and for half a second I forget she's gone." "That must be painful," Evelyn said softly. "It is, but it's also—" Daniel searched for the right word. "A gift, I guess. That part of her is still here, still real. Tommy has her sense of humor, her kindness, her complete inability to hold a grudge. When I look at him, I see her. And that's something." Evelyn nodded, still facing the window. "I've never had that. Someone who left pieces of themselves in the world, someone who mattered enough to leave echoes. You matter to 17,000 employees. That's different. They know Evelyn Hart, CEO. They don't know me. They wouldn't recognize me if I passed them on the street wearing anything except a power suit and controlled authority." She paused. "Your wife knew you, really knew you, the version of you that exists when no one's watching." "She did," Daniel agreed. "And I knew her. We had 8 years together. Not enough, but—" He stopped, emotion tightening his throat. "But more than some people get." "Do you think you'll ever let anyone else in? That way, I mean. Really in?" The question hung in the air between them, honest and complicated. Daniel had asked himself the same thing countless times, usually late at night when Tommy was asleep and the apartment felt too empty. "I don't know," he admitted. "Most days I'm so focused on survival, on being enough for Tommy, that I can't imagine having energy left for anyone else. And even if I did—" He hesitated. "How do you trust that again? That letting someone in won't just mean more loss eventually?" "You don't," Evelyn said simply. "You can't guarantee it. That's what makes it terrifying. Is that why you've stayed alone? Because you can't guarantee the outcome? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a rawness that suggested she was admitting something she rarely acknowledged even to herself. I stayed alone because I convinced myself I didn't need anyone, that relationships were distractions from building something that mattered. But tonight, standing in that ballroom, I realized I'd built an empire and forgotten to build a life. She turned to face him fully. You lost someone you loved. I never let myself love anyone in the first place. I'm not sure which is worse. Both are terrible, Daniel said honestly, just in different ways. Maybe. She walked back to the couch, sat down with less careful grace than before, her posture suggesting exhaustion had finally caught up with performance. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. I'm 42 years old and I've never been in love. Not really. I've had relationships, brief, transactional, mutually beneficial arrangements with people who wanted access to my world. But love? She shook her head. I don't think I know how. I don't think I ever learned. Daniel absorbed this confession, the weight of it. You learned how to build a company from nothing, how to lead thousands of people, how to navigate billion-dollar mergers, but you think you can't learn how to love someone? Those things have clear metrics, strategies, outcomes you can measure and adjust. Her voice carried frustration, maybe with herself. Love is chaos. It's vulnerability without guarantee. It's giving someone the power to destroy you and hoping they won't. I've spent my entire adult life eliminating variables I can't control. Love is nothing but variables. So you've avoided it entirely. I've avoided everything that might compromise my focus. Romance, friendship, family, anything that might require me to be something other than perfectly competent. She met his eyes. And now I'm sitting in a stranger's apartment on Christmas Eve because I had a panic attack, and the only person who felt safe was someone I've barely spoken to. That should tell you something about the choices I've made. It tells me you're human, Daniel said. It tells me that despite your best efforts, you still need connection. You just forgot how to ask for it. I never knew how to ask for it. My parents were academics, brilliant, distant, completely absorbed in their work. I learned early that emotional needs were inconvenient, that asking for attention was weakness. She looked down at her hands, the expensive rings that suddenly seemed like armor. I built my life on that model: self-sufficiency, independence, never needing anything from anyone. And how's that working out? Evelyn laughed, but the sound held no humor. I'm crying in a maintenance supervisor's apartment while 17 assistants tried desperately to locate me. I'd say the model has some flaws. Everyone's model has flaws, Daniel said gently. The difference is whether you're willing to acknowledge them. I'm acknowledging them now for whatever that's worth. It's worth something. It's worth starting. They sat in silence, the weight of confessions settling between them. Daniel thought about his own model, the careful distance he maintained from everyone except Tommy, the performance of competence that left no room for help or weakness. He'd judged Evelyn's isolation, but his own wasn't fundamentally different, just dressed in different circumstances. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said eventually. When Sarah died, how did you keep going? How did you not just collapse? Daniel had been asked variations of this question dozens of times, usually by well-meaning relatives or Tommy's teachers. But the way Evelyn asked it, direct, genuinely curious, without the subtle judgment that often accompanied such inquiries, made him want to answer honestly. I didn't have a choice, he said. Tommy was 3. He needed food and clothes and someone to tell him his mother was in heaven, even though I wasn't sure I believed in heaven anymore. So I kept going because stopping wasn't an option. He paused, remembering those early months. But honestly, I collapsed plenty, just in private. After Tommy went to bed, I'd sit on the bathroom floor and just break apart, cry until I couldn't breathe, rage at every unfairness. Then I'd get up, wash my face, and go to bed because morning would come and Tommy would need breakfast. That sounds unbearable. It was, but it got easier. Not better exactly, just easier to carry. He looked at her. Grief is like that. The weight doesn't change, but you get stronger. Your capacity adjusts. Eventually, you can hold it without collapsing. I don't know if I could do that, Evelyn admitted. If I lost someone I loved, if I'd ever let myself love someone, I don't think I'd survive it. You would. Humans are more resilient than we think. We adapt, manage, survive. He smiled slightly, echoing his earlier words. You've already survived things that would break other people. Building a company, fighting for space in a world designed to exclude you. Whatever pushed you out of that gala tonight, you're stronger than you know. Or more broken. Same thing sometimes, Daniel said, repeating Evelyn's earlier observation. Strength and brokenness aren't opposites. They're just different responses to the same experience. Evelyn considered this, turning it over like an unfamiliar object. You're good at this, talking about difficult things without flinching. I've had practice. 3 years of therapy appointments, grief counseling, single-parent support groups. You learn the vocabulary. He shrugged. Doesn't make it easier, but it makes it possible to articulate, to share with someone who might understand. Do I understand? Evelyn asked. My grief isn't about loss, it's about absence, about never having something in the first place. That's still grief, Daniel said firmly. Mourning what never was can be just as painful as mourning what you lost. Maybe more because there's no memories to hold on to, no good years to balance the bad, just the empty space where something should have been. Evelyn's eyes glistened, fresh tears threatening. I've never thought of it that way. As grief. I just thought I was deficient somehow, missing whatever component makes people capable of connection. You're not deficient, you're guarded. There's a difference. Is there? She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, mascara beyond salvaging now. Because right now it feels the same, like I've wasted 42 years being afraid of something that might have saved me. It's not too late, Daniel said, to choose differently, to let people in. Isn't it? I've built such high walls, such elaborate defenses. I wouldn't even know where to start dismantling them. Maybe you don't dismantle them all at once. Maybe you just... He gestured between them. Open a door. Let one person see inside. See what happens. And if what happens is painful, if I let someone in and they leave or die or decide I'm not worth the effort, then you'll survive that too, Daniel said quietly. Because that's what we do. We survive the things we're certain will destroy us, and we discover we're stronger than we knew. Evelyn absorbed this, the promise and the threat of it. Outside, the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern sky. Christmas morning arriving whether anyone was ready or not. The apartment had grown colder, the radiator hissing and clanking in its eternal battle against winter. I should call my driver, Evelyn said, but she didn't move. You should, Daniel agreed, but you don't have to, not yet. She nodded, settling deeper into the couch. A few more minutes, then. I'm not ready to go back to being Evelyn Hart just yet. Who are you right now? The question seemed to surprise her. She thought about it, really considered. I'm someone who's tired of pretending. Someone who maybe wants to figure out what comes after the pretending stops. She met his eyes. Is that allowed? To just be that? It's required, Daniel said. Being human isn't optional. You can ignore it, suppress it, bury it under work and achievement and perfect control, but it's still there, waiting for you to acknowledge it. And if acknowledging it means admitting I've been wrong? About everything? About how to live, what to prioritize, who to be? Then you admit it, and you start again. There's no shame in course correction. Evelyn laughed softly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's terrifying, but it's also the only way forward that doesn't involve spending the rest of your life in that ballroom, applauding your own success while dying of loneliness. The words were harsh, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded, accepting the truth of them. You're right. You're absolutely right. She stood, crossed to the window again, stared at the city waking up. I don't want to go back to that. To being the woman who has everything and nothing, who controls empires but can't control her own fear enough to let someone matter. Then don't, Daniel said simply. But I don't know how to be anyone else. So learn. You've learned everything else. Why not this? She turned, studied him with that direct gaze. Will you teach me? The question caught Daniel off guard. I'm not exactly qualified. My life is barely held together with duct tape and prayer. But you're honest about it. You don't pretend you have answers. You just show up, be present, let people see you. She crossed back to the couch, sat facing him. That's what I need to learn. How to exist without armor. How to be vulnerable without it destroying me. Daniel felt the weight of what she was asking, not for answers or solutions, but for companionship in uncertainty, for someone to witness her attempts at becoming something other than perfect. I can't promise I'll be good at it, he said carefully. I'm still figuring out my own stuff, still learning how to be a whole person instead of just a functional parent. But you're trying. That's more than I've done. Evelyn reached across the space between them, her hand hovering near his like a question. Can we try together? Figure out what comes after the walls come down? Daniel looked at her hand, manicured, elegant, wearing rings that cost more than his car, and then at her face, which showed nothing but honest hope and genuine fear. Two people at the end of their respective ropes, reaching for something that might be connection or might be disaster. He took her hand. We can try, he said quietly. Evelyn's fingers tightened around his, warm and real. Thank you. For tonight. For letting me fall apart. For not treating me like an institution. You're welcome. For what it's worth, you're much better company as a person than as a CEO. She laughed, surprised and genuine. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. They sat like that for a moment, hands loosely joined, the gesture both intimate and tentative. Daniel could feel his pulse in his fingertips, hyper-aware of the connection, the risk, the possibility of something shifting in ways he couldn't control or predict. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed again, persistent, demanding, the outside world refusing to be ignored any longer. She glanced at the screen, sighed heavily. It's the head of security. If I don't answer, he'll probably send a SWAT team. She looked at Daniel apologetically. I really do need to deal with this. I know. She released his hand slowly, the loss of contact strangely significant. Answered the phone with a voice that shifted seamlessly back into command mode. Marcus? Yes, I'm fine. No, there's no emergency. I needed some air and I didn't want... She listened, her expression tightening. I understand your concern, but I'm perfectly safe. I'll return to the penthouse within the hour. Yes. Thank you. She ended the call, set the phone down carefully. Apparently I've caused quite a crisis. The gala organizers are worried I had a medical emergency. The board chair wants an explanation. My PR team has drafted 4 different statements depending on what narrative we decide to pursue. She smiled without humor. Even my absence becomes a strategic problem to solve. What will you tell them? The truth, probably. That I needed to leave. That I'm fine. That there's nothing to worry about. She paused. The partial truth, anyway. They don't need to know where I went or why. You're protecting this, Daniel said, understanding. Tonight, this conversation. I'm protecting us, Evelyn corrected. Because if I tell them I spent Christmas Eve in my maintenance supervisor's apartment, it becomes a scandal, a liability, something that needs to be managed and spun and controlled. Her voice hardened. And I don't want tonight to become another transaction, another item on a damage control checklist. Daniel understood the impulse, even as something in his chest tightened with the implications. So we pretend this didn't happen. No, we protect what happened. What? Keep it separate from the world that would ruin it. She met his eyes. Is that all right with you? He should probably say no. Should insist on clarity, definition, some understanding of what this was or might become. But he recognized the truth beneath her request. She needed this night to exist outside consequences, outside the systems that governed her life. She needed one thing that remained untouched by expectation. It's all right, he said. Relief flooded her features. Thank you. I know it's asking a lot. It's asking for privacy. That's reasonable. In my world, nothing is private. Everything becomes data, ammunition, leverage. She stood, smoothed the wrinkled evening gown, tried futilely to repair her hair. But this... I want to keep this separate, protected. Is that selfish? It's human, Daniel said, echoing his earlier words. Wanting something that's just yours. Evelyn smiled, small and genuine. You keep making it sound simple, Like being human isn't the hardest thing I've ever attempted. It's not simple, but it's worth attempting. She nodded, gathered her shoes, her phone, the small clutch purse she'd apparently had with her all along. Stood in his living room looking like an evening gown refugee, out of place and somehow more real than any version of her he'd seen before. I should go, she said, before the SWAT team arrives. Probably wise. But neither of them moved. The moment stretched, waited with everything unsaid. Acknowledgement that crossing back through that door meant returning to their regular lives, to the vast gulf between CEO and maintenance supervisor, to roles that left no room for midnight confessions and honest vulnerability. Daniel, Evelyn said quietly, when we see each other at work, when I'm the CEO again and your facilities management, can we— She hesitated. Can we remember this? That underneath the titles, we're just two people trying to figure out how to be human? I'll remember, he promised. Good. Because I think I'm going to need reminding. When I'm back in that boardroom making decisions that affect thousands of lives, I'm going to need to remember that I sat in your apartment and cried and ate cookies and admitted I have no idea what I'm doing. You know exactly what you're doing, Daniel corrected. In business, it's the rest of life you're figuring out, just like everyone else. Just like everyone else, she repeated, as if testing the phrase. I like that. Being part of everyone else instead of separate from them. You were always part of everyone else. You just forgot. She crossed to him, stood close enough that he could smell her perfume. Expensive, subtle, probably with a French name he couldn't pronounce. Thank you, she said seriously. For tonight, for seeing me, for not treating this like an opportunity or a transaction. You're welcome. She leaned down, kissed his cheek, brief, chaste, carrying more significance than the gesture warranted. Then she stepped back, collected herself, became visibly more composed, even as something soft remained in her expression. Merry Christmas, Daniel. Merry Christmas, Evelyn. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob. I meant what I said, about trying, about learning how to do this, she gestured vaguely, human thing. I don't know what that looks like or how it works, but I meant it. I know. Will I see you? At work, I mean, beyond the standard employee-employer dynamic? Daniel considered the question carefully. I'm in the building every day. If you need someone who remembers tonight, who remembers you're human, I'll be around. Evelyn nodded, something like relief crossing her features. Good. That's good. She opened the door, stepped into the hallway, then turned back one more time. For what it's worth, I'm glad I panicked. I'm glad I came here. This was— She searched for words. This was the most honest conversation I've had in years. Maybe ever. Me too, Daniel admitted. She smiled, then walked away, heels clicking against linoleum, the evening gown trailing behind her like something from a different world entirely. Daniel watched until she disappeared around the corner toward the elevator, then closed the door quietly. The apartment felt impossibly empty in her absence. The couch still held the impression where she'd sat. The cookie plate bore evidence of her presence. The air itself seemed different, charged with the residue of confession and connection. Daniel stood in the center of his living room, processing what had just happened. His CEO had spent Christmas Eve in his apartment, had cried on his couch, had held his hand and asked him to teach her how to be vulnerable, had kissed his cheek and promised to try, to change, to become something other than perfectly controlled. It was absurd, impossible, the kind of thing that didn't happen to people like him, except it had happened, and now he had to figure out what came next. He cleaned up the cookie plate, rinsed the water glass Evelyn had never actually drunk from, straightened the couch cushions, turned off the television that had played unwatched all night, restored the apartment to its normal state, erasing physical evidence while memories remained stubbornly vivid. Outside, Christmas morning had fully arrived. Somewhere in Connecticut, Tommy would be waking up, rushing downstairs to see what Santa had brought. His sister would be making coffee, her husband would be assembling toys, the house would be full of noise and joy and the cheerful chaos of family. And Daniel stood alone in his quiet apartment, aware that something fundamental had shifted. He'd spent 3 years building walls around everything except his son, convincing himself that survival was enough, that asking for more was greedy or dangerous or foolish. But Evelyn had appeared at midnight and reminded him that walls kept out danger and connection equally, that survival without living was just slow death by isolation. He thought about her question, whether they could remember, beneath the titles, that they were just two people trying to figure out how to be human. The answer was obviously yes, but the harder question was what they'd do with that remembering, whether acknowledging their shared loneliness would change anything, or just make returning to their separate lives more painful. Daniel didn't have answers, but for the first time in 3 years, he wanted them. Wanted to figure out what came after the walls came down. Wanted to believe that connection was possible without guaranteed outcomes. Wanted simply to try. His phone buzzed, a text from his sister with a photo of Tommy buried in wrapping paper, grinning like Christmas had personally arrived just for him. Daniel smiled, typed back a response, felt his heart expand with love for his son. But underneath that familiar emotion sat something new and fragile. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The sense that his life might contain space for more than just functional survival. That letting someone see his loneliness didn't mean weakness, just honesty. That being human, for all its terror and uncertainty, might actually be worth attempting. He sat down on the couch where Evelyn had cried, where they'd held hands, where two isolated lives had briefly intersected. Outside, the city hummed its endless rhythm. Inside, Daniel Brooks sat with the ghost of midnight confessions and wondered what happened next. The answer came 3 days later, delivered in a way Daniel never expected. He was in the basement of Meridian Tower, elbow deep in the building's ancient boiler system, when his supervisor appeared at the doorway looking uncomfortable. Marcus Chen was a good man, competent and fair, but he had the permanent expression of someone perpetually bracing for bureaucratic disaster. "Brooks, you got a minute?" Daniel extracted himself from the machinery, wiping his hands on a rag that had long ago surrendered any claim to cleanliness. "What's up?" "Executive floor needs someone to check the ventilation system in the main conference room. Apparently there's a temperature complaint." Marcus shifted his weight. "They specifically requested you." Daniel's pulse jumped, though his face remained carefully neutral. "They requested me by name." "Yeah. Ms. Hart's assistant called down personally, said you were familiar with the executive floor systems and they wanted consistency." Marcus shrugged. "Seems like overkill for a thermostat adjustment, but when the CEO asks for someone specific, we don't argue." "Right, of course." Daniel kept his voice steady, professional. "I'll head up now." Marcus nodded, already turning away. "Toolkit's in your locker. Try not to take too long. We've got that electrical inspection on 12 this afternoon." Daniel waited until Marcus disappeared down the corridor before allowing himself a moment to process. 3 days since Christmas Eve. 3 days of returning to normal routines, picking up Tommy from his sisters, sitting through his son's endless recounting of presents and cousins and adventures. 3 days of wondering if that night had been real or some exhaustion-induced hallucination. Now Evelyn had summoned him. Specifically, under the pretense of ventilation issues. He collected his tools, checked his reflection in the small mirror inside his locker. The same tired face looked back. 35 going on 50, work clothes that had seen better years, no amount of preparation that would make him look like he belonged on the executive floor. But Evelyn had seen him at his most ordinary and hadn't flinched. Maybe that counted for something. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt longer than usual. Daniel watched the numbers climb, aware of his heartbeat, the weight of his toolkit, the absurdity of the situation. He was maintenance. She was the CEO. Nothing about Christmas Eve changed those fundamental facts, except it had changed something. He'd felt it in the way she'd held his hand, the honesty in her voice, the promise to try. And now she was creating opportunities for them to exist in the same space, however briefly, however carefully disguised as professional necessity. The executive floor receptionist barely glanced at him. Maintenance staff were functionally invisible up here, part of the building's infrastructure rather than its inhabitants. She waved him toward the conference room with the bored efficiency of someone managing appointments that actually mattered. Daniel walked down the hushed corridor, past offices with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, past artwork that probably cost more than his annual salary. The conference room door was closed. He knocked twice, waited. "Come in." Evelyn's voice, controlled and professional. Daniel opened the door. She sat at the head of a massive table, laptop open, looking every inch the CEO in a charcoal suit that probably had a designer name he wouldn't recognize. Her hair was perfect, makeup flawless, the woman from Christmas Eve completely erased beneath executive polish. Then she looked up and smiled. Small, genuine, the expression transforming her face into something softer. Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming so quickly. The formality was necessary, Daniel understood. Anyone could walk in. Assistants, board members, the countless people who inhabited Evelyn's professional world. But beneath the careful words, he heard the real question. Are you all right? Did I overstep? Is this okay? Ms. Hart, I understand there's a ventilation concern. He set down his toolkit, fell into the familiar rhythm of professional competence. Can you describe the issue? The temperature fluctuates unpredictably. Sometimes it's too warm, sometimes too cold. It makes extended meetings uncomfortable. She gestured at the ceiling vents. I thought perhaps you could assess whether there's a systemic problem or just user error. I'll take a look. Daniel pulled out his ladder, began examining the vent system with methodical precision. The thermostat controls were state-of-the-art, responding to both temperature and occupancy sensors. Nothing appeared wrong mechanically, but he went through the motions anyway, testing airflow, checking calibration, making minor adjustments that might or might not make any difference. How was your Christmas? Evelyn asked after a few minutes, her tone carefully casual. Did your son enjoy his time with family? He did. Came back with enough new dinosaurs to start a museum. Daniel adjusted a vent cover, keeping his eyes on the work. How was yours? After you left, I mean. Professionally managed. My team handled the fallout from my abrupt departure with their usual efficiency. The official story is that I felt unwell and went home to rest. She paused. Which is technically true. I did feel unwell, just not in the way they assumed. And now? Now I'm back. The board is satisfied. The gala raised the projected amount. Life continues as normal. Her voice carried a hint of something. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. Except it doesn't feel normal anymore. And Daniel climbed down from the ladder, moved to the next vent. What feels different? Everything. The meetings feel more pointless. The decisions feel more hollow. I sit in my office looking at reports and think about sitting in your apartment eating cookies and wondering which version of reality is actually real. Both are real. You're just more aware of the contrast now. Painfully aware. She closed her laptop, leaned back in her chair. I had coffee with 3 different executives this morning, discussed quarterly projections, market positioning, competitive analysis. The entire time I kept thinking about what you said, that being human isn't optional, that I can ignore it but it's still there. She met his eyes. You've made it very difficult to go back to pretending. Good, Daniel said quietly. Is it? Because right now it feels like torture. Like I've seen behind the curtain and can't unsee what my life actually is. Daniel finished with the second vent, moved his ladder again. The work gave him something to focus on while navigating the complexity of the conversation. So change it. You have more power than almost anyone to restructure your life. Do I? Or do I just have the illusion of power while actually being trapped by obligations, expectations, board oversight, shareholder value? She stood, walked to the window, a mirror of her posture in his apartment. I've spent 3 days thinking about what you said, about choosing differently, about learning to be human, but I don't know what that actually looks like in practice. It looks like this, Daniel said. Creating space for honest conversation, admitting when something feels wrong, asking for help figuring out what comes next. I'm asking, Evelyn said, turning to face him. I don't know how to dismantle 23 years of careful construction. Don't know how to be vulnerable in a world that punishes vulnerability. Don't know how to... She stopped, frustrated. I don't know how to do any of this. Neither do I, Daniel admitted. I'm barely holding my own life together. I'm not qualified to guide anyone else's transformation. But you're trying. That's more than I've done. She crossed back toward the conference table, maintaining professional distance even as her words demolished it. I need you to understand something. This... She gestured between them. Whatever this is, it matters. You matter. And And I don't say that lightly because I've spent my entire adult life not letting anyone matter. Daniel set down his tools, gave her his full attention. What are you saying, Evelyn? She took a breath, choosing words carefully. I'm saying that Christmas Eve wasn't an anomaly. It was a crack in the foundation, and now that it's there, I can't pretend everything's still solid. I can't go back to being the woman who has no room for connection. She met his eyes directly. I'm saying I want to keep that door open, the one I opened in your apartment. I want to figure out what comes next. Even though it's complicated, even though we exist in completely different worlds, especially because it's complicated. Because if I only pursue easy things, safe things, I'll never actually change. I'll just be the same person with better self-awareness. Her voice carried conviction now, the executive decisiveness applied to personal revelation. You asked me to try. To learn how to be human. I'm trying, but I can't do it alone. Daniel processed this, the weight of what she was offering and asking simultaneously. What do you need from me? Honesty, accountability. Someone who remembers I'm human when I forget. She smiled slightly. Someone who won't let me retreat into perfect control when things get difficult. That's a lot of responsibility. I know. And I'm not asking you to fix me or save me or be responsible for my emotional well-being. I have therapists for that. Or I will, once I actually commit to the process. She moved closer, still maintaining professional distance, but conveying intimacy through attention. I'm asking for friendship, for connection, for someone who sees the version of me that exists underneath the title. I can do that, Daniel said quietly. But you need to understand, I'm not some enlightened guru with answers. I'm a mess, too. I'm lonely and exhausted and still figuring out how to be a whole person instead of just a functional parent. I know. That's why I trust you. Evelyn's voice was soft but certain. You don't have an agenda. You don't want anything from me except honest interaction. That's more valuable than you know. A knock at the door interrupted them. Evelyn's assistant peeked in, professional and efficient. Ms. Hart, the Finance Committee meeting starts in 5 minutes. Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there. Evelyn waited until the door closed again before returning her attention to Daniel. I have to go, but... She hesitated, then continued with careful deliberation. There's a standing lunch reservation at Marconi's on Thursdays. 1 o'clock. Private room. Very discreet. If you wanted to continue this conversation somewhere less likely to be interrupted, that option exists. Daniel understood the invitation, the risk she was taking. Lunch with her maintenance supervisor, in public, however discreet. It meant crossing boundaries, acknowledging that Christmas Eve had started something that wouldn't be contained in late-night emergency visits. I'll check my schedule, he said, keeping his tone neutral for any potential listeners. The ventilation system should be working properly now. Let me know if you experience any further issues. I will. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. She gathered her laptop, moved toward the door, then paused. Daniel? It was the first time she'd used his first name outside his apartment. He looked at her, saw genuine warmth beneath professional composure. Thank you. For showing up. For being willing to try this with me. You're welcome. She left, heels clicking precisely against polished floors, every inch the powerful executive. Daniel packed up his tools, restored the ladder to its collapsed position, stood alone in the conference room processing what had just happened. An invitation to lunch, to ongoing connection, to deliberately constructing space for the honesty that had emerged on Christmas Eve. It was more than he'd expected, more than he'd allowed himself to hope for. It was also terrifying. Daniel had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of complication. Relationships meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of more loss when he'd barely survived the first devastation. Safer to stay isolated, to pour everything into Tommy, to keep his emotional world small and manageable. But Evelyn's question echoed in his mind. Don't you ever want to just break something, scream, demand that the universe give you back what it took? Yes, he did. He wanted to demand more than survival, wanted to believe that his life could contain joy and connection and the risky beauty of letting someone matter. He wanted to try. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of January day that felt like nature apologizing for winter's harshness. Daniel dropped Tommy at school, endured his son's endless chatter about the science project on volcanoes, promised to help with the presentation that weekend. Normal life, normal routines, the careful structures that kept chaos at bay. At 12:45, he changed out of his work clothes into the one decent shirt he owned. Nothing fancy, but clean and unwrinkled. Told Marcus he had a dentist appointment, would be back by 2:30. Marcus barely looked up from his paperwork, too buried in permit applications to question the deviation from routine. Marconi's was the kind of restaurant where maintenance supervisors didn't typically eat lunch. White tablecloths, attentive servers, prices that weren't listed on the menu because, if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Daniel gave his name at the host stand, was immediately escorted to a private room in the back. Evelyn was already there, seated at a small table set for two. She'd removed her suit jacket, sat in just a silk blouse and tailored pants, looking simultaneously professional and approachable. When she saw him, her expression brightened with genuine pleasure. "You came." "You invited," Daniel said simply. "Besides, I was curious what actual rich people eat for lunch." She laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "Overpriced vegetables mostly, but the privacy is worth the markup." She gestured for him to sit. "How are you? How's Tommy?" "Currently obsessed with volcanic eruptions. I've learned more about pyroclastic flow in the past week than I ever wanted to know." He settled into the chair, hyper-aware of the intimacy of the setting. Just the two of them, away from offices and roles and the structures that defined their normal interactions. "How are you? Surviving the return to normalcy?" "Barely. Every meeting feels like performance art. I sit there discussing market strategies and think about how none of it addresses the actual problem." She poured water for both of them from a carafe on the table. "The actual problem being that I've built a life that looks successful and feels empty." "Have you talked to anyone, your therapists?" "I fired two of them, the business stress one and the executive burnout specialist. Kept the personal development therapist and actually started being honest with her." Evelyn smiled ruefully. "Turns out therapy works better when you stop treating it like a board meeting and actually engage with the process." "What did she say?" "That I've spent my entire life optimizing for achievement rather than fulfillment. That success and happiness aren't synonymous. That I need to figure out what I actually want rather than what I've been conditioned to pursue." She met his eyes. "Basically, everything you said on Christmas Eve, but with more clinical terminology." "So what do you want?" Daniel asked. The question hung between them, simple and enormous. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer with the same careful precision she probably applied to billion-dollar mergers. "I want to matter to someone," she said finally, "not as a CEO or a business contact or a networking opportunity, just as Evelyn. As a person who has thoughts and feelings and vulnerabilities." She paused, then continued with increasing conviction. "I want friendship, real friendship, with someone who doesn't need anything from me except honest interaction. I want to know what it feels like to be chosen for who I am rather than what I can provide." "You have that," Daniel said quietly. "Right here, right now." "Do I?" "Because I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to ask for a promotion or a favor or access to my network." She said it without accusation, just honest uncertainty. "That's been my experience with every relationship I've attempted. Everyone wants something." "I don't want anything you're not freely offering." He meant it absolutely. "I have a job I'm good at, a son who needs me, a life that's small but mine. You showing up didn't change my material circumstances. It just..." He searched for the right words. "It just reminded me that I'm allowed to want more than survival." "What do you want?" Evelyn turned his question back on him. Daniel thought about it honestly. "I want Tommy to grow up knowing his father is more than just functional. I want to wake up some morning and not immediately calculate how many hours until I can sleep again. I want..." He stopped, surprised by the answer that emerged. "I want to believe that letting someone in won't inevitably lead to more devastation." "That's what we both want," Evelyn said softly. "Permission to be human without it destroying us." "Yeah, exactly that." The server appeared with menus, retreated discreetly after taking drink orders. Daniel scanned the options. Nothing had prices, everything sounded vaguely French and intimidating. Evelyn noticed his expression and smiled. "The pasta is excellent. Simple, not trying too hard. I'd recommend it." Pasta sounds perfect. They ordered, then sat in the comfortable silence that had characterized their best moments. Outside the private room, the restaurant hummed with lunch service. Inside, they existed in a bubble of honest attention. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said eventually. "About Sarah. About how you knew you loved her." Daniel wasn't sure how to answer. Love felt like such an inadequate word for what he'd shared with Sarah. The years of building a life together, of becoming parents, of navigating disappointments and celebrating small victories. "I don't know that there was a single moment," he said carefully. "It was more like accumulation. Small things that added up to certainty. The way she laughed at terrible jokes. How she cried during commercials about dogs. The fact that she saw me, really saw me, and chose me anyway." He smiled at the memory. "We were poor and exhausted and making it up as we went along. But we were doing it together. That mattered more than anything else." "That sounds..." Evelyn's voice caught slightly. "That sounds beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful." "It was both. Love is always both. I wouldn't know. I've never..." She stopped, started again. "I've had relationships. Physical intimacy, social companionship, mutually beneficial arrangements. But love? Actual, vulnerable, all in love? No. I've never let myself get close enough." "What stopped you?" "Fear, mostly. Of losing control, of giving someone power to hurt me, of discovering I'm not actually capable of the kind of connection other people seem to manage effortlessly." She met his eyes. "What if I'm fundamentally broken in that way? What if the cost of my success was whatever component makes people able to love?" "You're not broken," Daniel said firmly. "You're guarded. You've spent 42 years building defenses, but defenses aren't the same as incapacity. They're just barriers you constructed for protection." "Can they be deconstructed after this long?" "I think so. If you're willing to do the work." He leaned forward slightly. "But Evelyn, you need to understand, learning to love, to really let someone in, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to require vulnerability without guarantee. You won't be able to control outcomes or mitigate risks or maintain perfect composure." "I know. That's what terrifies me. But it's also what makes it real, what makes it matter." Daniel spoke from hard-earned experience. Safe love isn't love. It's just transaction with affection. Real love is choosing someone despite the risk. Because of the risk, even. Evelyn absorbed this, turning it over. "And you think I'm capable of that?" "I think you're already doing it," Daniel said gently. "You came to my apartment on Christmas Eve. You're sitting here now, having this conversation, admitting uncertainty. That's vulnerability. That's risk. You're already choosing to try." "With you," she said quietly. "I'm trying with you. Because you feel safe." "I'm not safe," Daniel corrected. "I'm a mess with my own unresolved grief and complicated life. But I'm honest. And I see you. Maybe that's enough to start." The food arrived, interrupting the intensity of the moment. They ate in companionable silence for a while. The pasta as excellent as Evelyn had promised. Daniel watched her across the table. This powerful woman who commanded billions, who made decisions that affected thousands, who'd spent 42 years perfecting the art of control. And underneath all that, just a person who wanted what everyone wanted, to matter, to be chosen, to be seen. "Tell me about your week," Evelyn said eventually. "Not the highlight reel, the real version." So Daniel did. Told her about Tommy's science project, the broken water heater in 3C that had required a midnight emergency call, the way his sister kept gently suggesting he should start dating again. Told her about the exhaustion that never quite lifted, the guilt he carried about not being enough, the moments of unexpected joy when Tommy said something wise or funny or heartbreakingly innocent. Evelyn listened with complete attention, asking questions, offering no solutions or advice, just presence. When he finished, she shared her own week. The tedious board meetings, the difficult personnel decision about firing an executive who'd been with the company for 15 years, the moment in her penthouse when she'd realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd cooked a meal for herself. "I don't even know if I can cook," she admitted, I've had personal chefs, meal delivery, restaurant reservations for so long that I can't remember ever actually preparing food. You should learn, Daniel suggested. Tommy and I cook together every Sunday. It's messy and chaotic, and half the time we end up ordering pizza anyway, but he searched for the right word. It's grounding, real, something you make with your hands instead of just managing with your mind. Would you teach me? The question came out tentative, hopeful. Not professionally, just as friends. Show me what it looks like to make something without perfection being the goal. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, some recognition of what she was really asking. Not just cooking lessons, permission to be incompetent, space to fail without consequences, an opportunity to experience accomplishment that wasn't measured by quarterly reports or stock prices. Yeah, he said, I can do that. Evelyn's smile transformed her face, genuine joy replacing careful composure. Really? Really? Fair warning, though, my kitchen is terrible, my equipment is secondhand, and there's a very high probability of Tommy monopolizing the conversation with dinosaur facts. That sounds perfect, Evelyn said, and meant it absolutely. They finished lunch, lingered over coffee, talked about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, movies they'd seen, the small observations about life that only got shared in moments of trust. Eventually, the restaurant began preparing for dinner service, and they reluctantly acknowledged that reality awaited. At the door, Evelyn turned to him. Thank you for coming, for being willing to keep trying this with me. You're welcome. Same time next week? Yes, definitely yes. She paused, then added quietly, and the cooking lesson? Whenever works for you, I'll make time. Sunday afternoon, come to my apartment around 3. Wear clothes you don't mind getting messy. I don't think I own clothes like that. Then buy some. Consider it part of the learning process. She laughed, nodded, then did something that surprised them both. Reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. The gesture was over in seconds, but the warmth lingered. Daniel walked back to Meridian Tower, returned to the basement and his interrupted work, fielded Marcus's questions about his dental appointment with practiced vagueness. But underneath the familiar routines, something had fundamentally shifted. He'd opened a door, let someone in, chosen risk over safety. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt less like danger and more like possibility. Sunday afternoon arrived with unexpected snow. The first real accumulation of winter, transforming the city into something quieter, softer, almost gentle. Daniel spent the morning with Tommy at the Natural History Museum, letting his son drag him through the dinosaur exhibits for the 100th time, listening to enthusiastic lectures about the difference between the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. Dad, did you know that some scientists think T-Rex might have had feathers? Tommy asked as they walked home through snow-dusted streets. I did not know that. Doesn't that ruin the scary factor? No way. Feathered dinosaurs are even cooler. They're like dragons, but real. Tommy jumped over a slush puddle, his winter coat too small at the sleeves. Daniel made a mental note to buy a new one, added it to the endless list of things that needed attention. Hey buddy, we're having a guest this afternoon. Someone from my work is coming over to learn how to cook. Tommy looked up, suspicious. Is it a lady? It is. Her name is Evelyn. She's my boss, actually. Your boss doesn't know how to cook? Tommy's 8-year-old logic couldn't quite process this. Is she really bad at being a grown-up? Daniel laughed despite himself. No, she's very good at being a grown-up. She just never learned how to cook, so we're going to teach her. Think you can help? Can we make spaghetti? With the sauce from the jar that you pretend you made from scratch? We absolutely can make spaghetti, and I don't pretend, I enhance. Daniel ruffled his son's hair. But you have to promise to be nice and not tell her all my shortcuts. I'll think about it, Tommy said with the negotiating savvy of someone who'd learned early how to leverage information. They arrived home at 2:30. Daniel straightened the apartment, moved Tommy's latest Lego construction to a less conspicuous location, checked that they had all the ingredients for a basic marinara sauce. He debated what to make, something impressive enough to feel like an accomplishment, simple enough not to overwhelm someone who claimed to have never cooked. Pasta felt right. Elemental, forgiving, the kind of thing you could mess up and still eat. At exactly 3 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. Tommy raced to answer before Daniel could stop him, yanked it open with the confidence of someone who'd never learned to fear strangers. Evelyn stood in the hallway looking nothing like a CEO. She wore jeans, actual jeans, dark and new but unmistakably casual, and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup. She carried a grocery bag and looked both nervous and determined. "Hi," she said to Tommy. "You must be Tommy. I'm Evelyn." Tommy studied her with the unfiltered assessment of childhood. "You're really tall." "Tommy," Daniel said warningly from behind him. "It's all right," Evelyn said, smiling. "I am really tall, especially in heels, which I'm very glad I'm not wearing today." She looked past Tommy to Daniel. "Hi, I brought ingredients. I wasn't sure what you needed, so I bought, well, everything the grocery store suggested." Daniel took the bag, peered inside. Expensive olive oil, imported tomatoes, fresh basil, artisan pasta, ingredients that cost probably 10 times what he usually spent. "This is great. Maybe overkill, but great." "I don't know the difference between overkill and appropriate. I let the grocery store employee guide me." She stepped inside, looked around the apartment with the same careful attention she'd shown on Christmas Eve. "Thank you for letting me come. For teaching me." "You're welcome. Come on, the kitchen's this way," which you know because you've been here before, but Daniel realized he was nervous, talking too much. Evelyn's presence in his apartment on Christmas Eve had carried the urgency of crisis. This was deliberate, planned, and intentional crossing of boundaries that made it somehow more significant. Tommy followed them into the small kitchen, climbing onto his usual stool at the counter. "Dad says you don't know how to cook. How do you eat?" "Tommy," Daniel said again. "No, it's a fair question." Evelyn settled onto the other stool, meeting Tommy's eye level. "I have people who cook for me, or I go to restaurants, or I eat things that come pre-made from very expensive stores." "That sounds lonely," Tommy said with the casual brutality of childhood honesty. Evelyn blinked, clearly not expecting the observation. Yes. It is lonely, actually. That's why I'm here. To learn how to make food with friends instead of just eating alone." Tommy nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Okay, we're making spaghetti. Dad's going to pretend he makes the sauce from scratch, but really, he uses the jar and just adds stuff to make it taste better." "Tommy, whose side are you on?" "The truth side," Tommy said solemnly, making Evelyn laugh. That warm, genuine sound that seemed to surprise her every time it emerged. Daniel pulled out ingredients, distributed tasks. Tommy was in charge of filling the pot with water, an operation he took extremely seriously. Evelyn was assigned the task of chopping onions and garlic under Daniel's supervision. "Just rough chop. Doesn't need to be perfect," he instructed, handing her a knife. Evelyn held it like a foreign object, uncertain of grip or shunt angle. "I've negotiated billion-dollar mergers. Why is this so intimidating?" "Because you can't control onions with strategy. You just have to cut them and accept that you're probably going to cry." "Great. Vulnerability through vegetables." She started chopping, slowly, carefully, the precision of someone accustomed to perfection applied to an imperfect task. The pieces were uneven, some too large, some nearly minced, but she persisted with the same determination she probably brought to everything. "Dad, the water's ready," Tommy announced, having filled the pot to precisely the line Daniel had marked. "Perfect. Now we wait for it to boil. Evelyn, how are those onions?" "Humiliating and tear-inducing, but technically chopped." Daniel came to inspect, stood close enough to guide her hands to a better cutting angle. "Here, let the knife do the work. You're trying to control it too much." "Story of my life," Evelyn muttered, but she adjusted her grip, let the knife fall with its own weight. The next few cuts came easier, more natural. Tommy watched with fascination. "You're really bad at this." "Tommy!" "What? She is, but she's getting better." He turned to Evelyn. "When I first learned to ride a bike, I crashed into a garbage can, but now I'm really good. You'll get good at cooking too." Evelyn smiled at him, something softening in her expression. "Thank you, Tommy. That's very encouraging." They worked in companionable chaos, Daniel managing multiple tasks, Tommy providing commentary, Evelyn following instructions with the focused intensity of someone tackling an unfamiliar challenge. The kitchen filled with the smell of sautéing onions and garlic, the sound of water coming to a boil, the easy rhythm of people creating something together. "Okay, now the tomatoes," Daniel said, opening the can of imported San Marzanos that Evelyn had brought. "We're going to crush them by hand. It's messy, but it's better than using a blender." "By hand?" Evelyn looked at the can dubiously. "By hand. Just squeeze. Let yourself get messy." Evelyn reached into the can tentatively, pulled out a whole tomato, squeezed it experimentally. Juice squirted across the counter, splashing her sweater. She froze, staring at the mess. Tommy giggled. "You got tomatoed." "I did," Evelyn agreed, then did something that surprised all of them. She laughed, really laughed, and squeezed another tomato with deliberate enthusiasm, sending more juice flying. "That's the spirit," Daniel said, grinning. "Cooking is supposed to be messy." They crushed tomatoes together, Evelyn gradually relaxing into the chaos, letting herself be less than perfect. Daniel added herbs, a splash of wine from a bottle he kept for cooking, adjusted seasoning while Tommy stirred the pot importantly. "This smells amazing," Evelyn said, wiping tomato juice from her hands. "I can't believe we made this." "We're not done yet. Now we wait for everything to simmer together. The waiting is part of the process." They migrated to the small dining table while the sauce cooked, Tommy entertaining them with elaborate theories about which dinosaurs would win in various combat scenarios. Evelyn engaged with genuine interest, asking questions, treating Tommy's expertise with the same respect she probably showed board members. Daniel watched them interact, something warm expanding in his chest. Sarah had been like this, able to connect with Tommy on his level without condescension. It had been one of the things he'd loved most about her. Seeing it in Evelyn felt both familiar and startling. "Dad, can I show Evelyn my volcano project?" Tommy asked. "If she wants to see it." "I very much want to see it," Evelyn said seriously. Tommy raced to his room, returned with a papier-mâché mountain that leaned slightly to the left, painted in enthusiastic colors. "It's going to erupt with baking soda and vinegar. We're doing the demonstration on Friday." "This is incredible," Evelyn said, examining the project with genuine admiration. "Did you make this yourself?" "Dad helped with the structure part because I kept making it fall over. But I did all the painting and the research about pyroclastic flow." "Pyroclastic flow is serious business," Evelyn agreed gravely. Daniel checked the sauce, declared it ready. They assembled the meal together. Evelyn learning to cook pasta properly, drain it without burning herself, toss it with the sauce that had come together better than Daniel had hoped. Set the small table with mismatched plates, grocery store Parmesan, the bottle of wine that Evelyn had also brought. "Is this allowed?" she asked, gesturing at the wine. "With Tommy here?" "He knows adults sometimes drink wine with dinner. It's not a secret." Daniel poured glasses for both of them, water for Tommy. Normalizing it means demystifying it. They sat, served the pasta, took first bites. The sauce was good. Actually good. The imported ingredients and fresh herbs elevating it beyond Daniel's usual shortcuts. Evelyn's face registered surprise, then delight. "We made this," she said wonderingly. This is really good." "Of course it's good," Tommy said through a mouthful of spaghetti. "We're excellent cooks." "You are. You really are." Evelyn looked at Daniel across the table, her expression holding gratitude and something deeper, recognition, maybe, of what this simple act represented. "Thank you for this, for letting me be part of it." "You're welcome," Daniel said quietly. They ate slowly, conversation flowing easily between topics. Tommy dominated with his usual enthusiasm, but Evelyn held her own, sharing carefully chosen stories about her own childhood, the academic parents who'd prioritized achievement, the private schools where she'd learned to compete, the early realization that excellence was her path to mattering. "Did you have friends?" Tommy asked with typical childhood directness. "Not many. I was always studying or doing activities that would look good on applications. I told myself I was too busy for friends." She paused. "Really, I was just scared that if people got to know me, they wouldn't like what they found." "That's sad," Tommy said simply. "It was," Evelyn agreed. "But I'm trying to fix it now. Your dad is helping me learn how to be better at having friends." Tommy considered this, nodded. "Dad's good at that. He's my best friend." Daniel felt his throat tighten. You're mine too, buddy. Evelyn looked away, blinking rapidly. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. You two are very lucky to have each other. We are, Daniel agreed. But we're also working at it. Being close doesn't happen automatically. You have to choose it every day. Is that hard? Evelyn asked. Sometimes. When I'm exhausted or Tommy's being difficult or I'm drowning in responsibilities. But it's worth it. He looked at his son, this person he'd made and was raising and loved more than breathing. It's always worth it. They finished dinner, cleaned up together, Evelyn learning to wash dishes properly, laughing when she created too many bubbles, accepting instruction with the humility of someone genuinely trying to learn. Tommy dried while providing commentary, the three of them falling into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. I should go, Evelyn said eventually, reluctance clear in her voice. I've taken up your whole afternoon. You've made our afternoon better, Daniel corrected. This was really nice. Can you come back? Tommy asked. Next time we can make pizza from scratch. Dad knows how to throw the dough in the air even though he usually drops it. I would love that, Evelyn said, crouching to meet Tommy's eye level. Thank you for teaching me today. You're an excellent instructor. You're welcome. You're not bad for a beginner. High praise from an 8-year-old. Daniel walked Evelyn to the door while Tommy started building something elaborate with Legos in the living room. They stood in the small entryway, the evening stretching between them. Thank you, Evelyn said quietly. For this, for letting me into your home, your life, your time with Tommy. I know it's complicated, crossing these boundaries. It doesn't feel complicated, Daniel said honestly. It feels right, natural, like this is what friendship is supposed to look like. Is that what this is? Friendship? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them seemed ready to fully examine. Daniel thought about how to answer, about the truth that had been building since Christmas Eve. I think it's friendship, he said carefully, and maybe the beginning of something more. But we don't have to define it right now. We can just be. See what develops. I'd like that, Evelyn said. The not defining, the letting it be what it is. She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. But Daniel, I need you to know, whatever this becomes, you matter. You and Tommy both. You've reminded me what it feels like to be human instead of just successful. That's everything. You matter too, Daniel said. The version of you that exists here, away from boardrooms and expectations. The person who laughs at messy tomatoes and asks an 8-year-old about dinosaurs like his opinions matter. That person is worth knowing. Evelyn's eyes glistened. I'm afraid I'm going to mess this up, that I'll retreat into old patterns or get scared or forget how to be this version of myself. Then I'll remind you, that's what friends do. She nodded, gathered herself, started to leave. Then she turned back, stood on her toes, and kissed his cheek, exactly as she had on Christmas Eve, but this time the gesture felt less like goodbye and more like promise. Same time next week? She asked. Same time next week, Daniel confirmed. She left, and Daniel stood in the doorway watching her navigate the snowy sidewalk toward where her driver waited discreetly down the block. She'd insisted on walking the final distance, maintaining the illusion of normalcy, protecting the fragile space they were constructing together. When Daniel returned to the living room, Tommy looked up from his Legos. I like her. Yeah? Yeah. She's weird but nice, like she doesn't know how normal people work, but she's trying really hard to figure it out. He returned to his construction, then added casually, Is she going to be your girlfriend? Daniel sat down on the floor next to his son, picked up a stray Lego brick. I don't know, buddy. Maybe. Would that be okay with you? Tommy thought about it with his characteristic seriousness. Is she going to try to be my new mom? No, nobody could replace your mom. But she could be someone important in our lives, someone who cares about us. Okay, that sounds good. Tommy fit two pieces together with a satisfying click. Just don't let her change how we do Sunday dinners. I like it being just us sometimes. I won't. I promise. Daniel pulled his son into a side hug, grateful for the wisdom and resilience that had somehow emerged from tragedy. You're pretty smart, you know that? Duh. I get it from you. Daniel laughed, helped with the Lego construction, let the evening settle into familiar rhythms. But underneath the normalcy, something fundamental had shifted. He'd let someone into their carefully constructed life, had allowed Evelyn to see their routines, their chaos, their imperfect love, and instead of disrupting everything, her presence had somehow enhanced it. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Daniel stood at the window looking at the snow-covered city. His phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Thank you for today. I can't remember the last time I felt that present, that connected, that human. You and Tommy are remarkable. I'm grateful you're letting me try to be worthy of your friendship." Daniel typed back, "You're already worthy. You just forgot for a while. We all do." Her response came quickly. "Will you remind me? When I forget?" "Always," he wrote, and meant it absolutely. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Thursday lunches at Marconi's, conversations that ranged from profound to ridiculous, the kind of easy intimacy that emerged when two people stopped performing and started just being. Sunday dinners at Daniel's apartment, Evelyn learning to cook with increasing competence, Tommy growing comfortable with her presence until she became simply part of their lives rather than a visitor. At work, they maintained careful distance. Professional emails, brief conversations about building maintenance, the performance of employer-employee relationship that satisfied observers while concealing the depth of what existed beneath. It felt like living in two realities simultaneously, the public one where they barely knew each other, and the private one where they were learning each other's fears and hopes and the small details that made up actual lives. One Thursday in late February, Evelyn arrived at lunch looking tired and stressed, the polished veneer showing cracks. "Rough morning?" Daniel asked. "Rough week, rough month, rough entire quarter." She accepted the water the server poured, didn't touch it. "We're negotiating a merger that's going poorly. The board is questioning my judgment. I have 3 different executives positioning themselves to take advantage of any perceived weakness." She rubbed her temples. "I'm exhausted, and I don't know how much longer I can maintain the fiction that I have everything under control." "So stop maintaining it," Daniel suggested gently. "I can't. If I show weakness, if I admit uncertainty, they'll use it against me. That's how this world works. Your world, maybe. But you don't have to live entirely in that world." He leaned forward. "Evelyn, you're allowed to be tired, allowed to admit when something's difficult. That's not weakness, that's honesty. In the boardroom, honesty gets punished. Then maybe the boardroom isn't where you should be looking for validation." He met her eyes. "What do you want? Not what the board wants, not what shareholders expect. What do you actually want?" Evelyn was quiet for a long time, the question clearly landing somewhere deeper than she'd expected. When she spoke, her voice carried a rawness that suggested she was admitting something she barely acknowledged to herself. "I want to walk away from all of it," she said quietly. "The mergers, the negotiations, the constant performance. I want to go somewhere quiet and cook dinner and talk about nothing important with someone who sees me as more than a quarterly projection." She looked at him directly. "I want what you have, what you and Tommy have. Connection that matters more than success." "You can have that," Daniel said. "You're already building it, with us, with the life you're constructing outside the office. It doesn't have to be either or." "Doesn't it? Because right now it feels like I'm being torn in half. The version of me that exists in your apartment can't survive in the boardroom. And the version that runs Meridian Industries can't be vulnerable enough for real connection." Her voice broke slightly. "I don't know how to be both." "Then maybe you need to decide which one actually matters," Daniel said carefully. "Which version of yourself you want to be when you're alone at night. Which life you want to look back on when you're 80. Evelyn stared at him, the truth of it settling over her like weight. "You're asking me to choose." "I'm asking you to be honest about what you're choosing. Right now, every day, you're making choices. You can keep making them unconsciously, letting momentum and expectation decide. Or you can make them deliberately, with full awareness of what you're gaining and losing." He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "But Evelyn, you can't keep living in both worlds without eventually burning out. Something has to give." "I know," she whispered. "I've known for weeks. I just haven't wanted to admit it." "What are you afraid will happen if you admit it?" She was quiet, tears threatening. When she spoke, Her voice was barely audible. That I'll have wasted 23 years building something that doesn't actually matter. That I'll have sacrificed everything, relationships, family, any possibility of ordinary happiness, for an empire that will replace me the moment I step down. That my entire life's work will turn out to have been, her voice broke, empty. Daniel squeezed her hand, let her sit with the truth of that fear. Or maybe, he said gently, you'll discover that those 23 years taught you exactly what you needed to learn. That building the empire showed you what you actually value. That knowing what you don't want is just as important as knowing what you do. Evelyn wiped at her eyes, mascara smudging in a way that was becoming familiar. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just further along in the process of losing everything and discovering what matters. He smiled sadly. Grief is a hell of a teacher. I'm grieving too, Evelyn said quietly. The life I thought I wanted, the person I thought I had to be. It's loss, even if what I'm losing was never actually making me happy. Then grieve it, let yourself feel it, and then decide what comes next. She nodded, gathering herself, wiping away tears with a napkin. I don't know what comes next, but I know I can't keep doing this. Can't keep pretending the boardroom is enough. So what do you actually want? Daniel asked again. Evelyn met his eyes, and this time her answer came without hesitation. I want to matter to someone more than I matter to shareholders. I want Sunday dinners and honest conversation, and someone who knows all my flaws and chooses me anyway. She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. I want you, Daniel, not as therapy or escape or rebellion against my life. I want you because you see me, and you're not afraid of what you see. Because with you I can be human instead of perfect. Because when I'm with you and Tommy, I remember what it feels like to be happy. The confession hung between them, honest and terrifying and undeniably real. Daniel felt his heart hammering, aware that they'd crossed another threshold, moved from careful friendship into territory that demanded acknowledgement. I want you too, he said quietly. I've been trying not to admit it because it's complicated and risky and nothing about our lives makes sense together. But I want you. The version of you that laughs at messy tomatoes and admits she's scared. The person, not the title. Evelyn's expression transformed, fear giving way to something that looked like hope. What do we do with that? With wanting each other? We figure it out, Daniel said simply. Together, honestly. Without guarantees or perfect plans. We just try. Even though it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated. Easy things don't teach us anything. She smiled through tears, nodded. Okay, we try. But Daniel, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we become something more than friends, my world is going to notice. There will be gossip, judgment, probably consequences for both of us. I know. And you're willing to risk that. Daniel thought about Tommy, about the life they'd built, about whether introducing this complication was fair to his son. But he also thought about what he'd told Evelyn weeks ago, that being human meant risk, meant choosing connection despite uncertainty. Yeah, he said. I'm willing to risk it. Are you? Evelyn took a shaky breath, then nodded with the decisiveness she probably brought to billion-dollar decisions. Yes, I am. Because you're worth it. This, whatever we're building, is worth it. They sat with that truth, hands still joined across the table, aware they'd just fundamentally altered the trajectory of both their lives. Outside the private room, the restaurant continued its lunch service. Inside, two people who'd started as strangers had chosen each other. Consequences be damned. It wasn't safe. It wasn't simple. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough. The decision, once made, changed everything and nothing simultaneously. They left the restaurant together, no longer carefully timing their departures to avoid being seen. Evelyn's driver was waiting, and she hesitated at the car door. Come with me, she said suddenly. Just for a drive. I'm not ready to go back to the office yet. Daniel checked his phone. He had 40 minutes before he needed to return to Meridian Tower. Okay, a short drive. They climbed into the back of the town car, the driver expertly navigating into traffic without comment or curiosity. Evelyn gave no destination, just asked him to drive, and they moved through the city in companionable silence, watching New York pass by the tinted windows. "I've been thinking about what you said," Evelyn began, her hand finding his on the leather seat between them. "About choosing deliberately. About deciding which version of myself I want to be. And I think I've been making the wrong choice for a very long time." She turned to face him. "The merger I mentioned, the one that's going poorly. I could fix it. I know exactly what concessions to make, what strategies to employ. But every time I sit in those meetings, I think about whether any of this will matter in 5 years, in 10, when I'm old and looking back at my life." "What conclusion did you reach? That quarterly earnings don't attend your funeral? That nobody's tombstone says she maximized shareholder value? That all the success in the world doesn't mean anything if you're alone?" Her voice was steady now, decided. "I'm going to step down as CEO." Daniel felt his breath catch. "Evelyn, that's enormous. Are you sure?" "I'm terrified, but yes, I'm sure." She squeezed his hand. "I've been CEO for 15 years. I built Meridian from nothing into something significant. That accomplishment doesn't disappear just because I stop. But if I keep going, if I keep sacrificing everything for growth and profit and board approval, I'll lose the chance to build something that actually matters. A life, connections, love." She met his eyes. "I'll lose you, and I'm not willing to do that." "What will you do after you step down?" "I don't know yet. Consult, maybe. Teach. Actually use the business degree I earned before I forgot why I wanted it." She smiled. "Learn to cook more than just pasta. Spend time with people I care about without calculating the networking value. Figure out who Evelyn Hart is when she's not defined by her title." "That's brave," Daniel said quietly. "It's selfish," she corrected. "I'm choosing what I want over what's expected." "That's not brave, that's just finally being honest." "Sometimes those are the same thing." The car continued its aimless route through the city. Daniel thought about the implications of what she was proposing. The board would resist. The transition would be complex. The media would speculate endlessly about why she was leaving. But underneath all that, he recognized the fundamental truth. Evelyn was choosing herself. Choosing life over achievement. Choosing connection over control. "When will you tell them?" he asked. "Soon. Within the week. I need to prepare the announcement properly, ensure there's a succession plan, handle the inevitable fallout." She looked out the window at the city she'd conquered professionally but never quite inhabited personally. "It's going to be chaotic, ugly, probably. The board won't understand. Half my executives will see it as opportunity, the other half as betrayal." "Will you regret it?" She considered the question honestly. "Maybe sometimes. When I'm watching someone else run the company I built. When I read about Meridian in the news and I'm not part of the story anymore. But Daniel," she turned back to him, her expression clear and certain. "I already regret the years I spent alone, the relationships I didn't pursue, the life I didn't live because I was too busy building an empire. Those regrets hurt worse than anything stepping down could cost me." Daniel lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "I'm proud of you, for having the courage to change course. I'm terrified I'll mess this up, that I'll get 3 months into retirement and realize I've made a terrible mistake. Then you'll adjust. Make a new plan. That's what we do. We adapt, manage, survive, and then eventually we figure out how to actually live." He smiled. "Besides, you won't be doing it alone. You'll have me, and Tommy, who will absolutely keep you humble." Evelyn laughed, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "How is he going to react to this? To us becoming whatever we're becoming?" "I think he'll be okay with it. He already likes you. And he's been dropping hints that it's weird I don't have a girlfriend." Daniel paused, considering. "But I want to be careful. He's 8. He lost his mother. I need to make sure he understands that you're not trying to replace her, that you're someone different, someone new who cares about him." "I do care about him," Evelyn said seriously. "He's remarkable, funny, and wise, and completely himself. I see you in him, that same kindness, that same ability to be present. It's—" She stopped, emotion catching in her throat. It's everything I never knew I wanted. A family, people who matter more than achievements. You'll have that, Daniel promised. We'll figure it out together. Messily, imperfectly, but together. The driver had circled back toward Meridian Tower. Evelyn asked him to drop Daniel a block away. Old habits of discretion, protection against gossip that would soon be irrelevant anyway. They sat in the idling car, hands joined, aware they were standing at a threshold neither could cross alone. I love you, Evelyn said suddenly, the words emerging with the same decisive clarity she'd probably once used to announce mergers. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you, and I needed you to know that before everything gets complicated. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, some final wall crumbling under the weight of her honesty. I love you too, have for weeks probably. I was just too scared to admit it. Are you still scared? Terrified, but also hopeful. For the first time in 3 years, I'm hopeful about something other than just getting through the day. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, a promise rather than a conclusion. When they pulled apart, she was smiling through tears. Go, before Marcus wonders where you disappeared to. I'll see you Sunday? Sunday? And Evelyn? Yes? Thank you for being brave enough to choose this, to choose us. Thank you for being patient enough to wait while I figured it out. Daniel climbed out of the car, watched it pull away, then walked the remaining block to Meridian Tower feeling like reality had shifted on its axis. He loved Evelyn Hart. She loved him. She was stepping down as CEO to build a different kind of life. Nothing about it made logical sense, but everything about it felt inevitable. Marcus was in the basement when Daniel returned, barely looking up from his clipboard. How was the dentist? Fine, just a cleaning. The lie came easily, would be unnecessary soon, but for now maintained the careful fiction. Good. I need you to check the humidity sensors on 37. They're reading weird numbers. Daniel collected his tools, lost himself in the familiar rhythms of work, but underneath the mechanical competence, his mind was racing. Evelyn loved him. They were building something real. The future, for the first time since Sarah's death, looked like more than just survival. That evening, after Tommy was in bed, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table and called his sister. Hey, stranger, Rachel answered. Haven't heard from you in weeks. How's my favorite nephew? Tommy's good, growing too fast. His science project on volcanoes won first place in the class competition. That's wonderful. You must be so proud. I am. Daniel paused, trying to figure out how to articulate what he needed to say. Rach, I need to tell you something. I've met someone. Silence on the other end, then carefully. Someone as in, you're dating? Actually dating? Actually dating. Her name is Evelyn. It's complicated, but she's important. Really important. Rachel's voice warmed with genuine happiness. Danny, that's amazing. Tell me about her. How did you meet? So he did. Told his sister about a Christmas Eve, about the unlikely connection, about Thursday lunches and Sunday dinners, and the slow building of something that felt simultaneously fragile and inevitable. He left out the detail about Evelyn being his CEO, that would require more explanation than he had energy for tonight, but conveyed the essential truth. He'd found someone who saw him, who made him feel less alone, who Tommy already liked. She sounds wonderful, Rachel said when he finished. Are you happy? The question landed with unexpected weight. Happy. Was he happy? Daniel thought about it honestly, about the exhaustion that still defined most days, the grief that hadn't disappeared, the overwhelming responsibility of single parenthood. But underneath all that, yes, there was happiness, small and new and growing stronger. Yeah, he said, surprised by the truth of it. I think I am. Good. You deserve that, Danny. You deserve someone who sees what an incredible person you are. She paused. How's Tommy handling it? He likes her, says she's weird but nice. High praise from an 8-year-old. Rachel laughed. That sounds about right. When do I get to meet her? Soon. Once things settle. Once we figure out what this is and how to navigate it. Once the world knows she's not my CEO anymore, he thought, but didn't say. They talked for a few more minutes about logistics and family updates before saying goodbye. Daniel sat in the quiet kitchen, aware he'd crossed another threshold. He'd told someone about Evelyn, made it real beyond just the two of them. Soon he'd tell Tommy more explicitly. Soon the world would know. But for now, the secret still felt precious, worth protecting. Sunday arrived with unusual warmth, spring beginning to assert itself against winter's resistance. Tommy was building an elaborate Lego city on the living room floor when Evelyn knocked at 2:30, earlier than her usual 3 o'clock. "Sorry, I know I'm early," she said when Daniel opened the door. "I was too anxious to wait at home." "Anxious about what?" She stepped inside and Daniel immediately noticed something different. She looked tired, stressed, but also somehow lighter, like someone who'd set down a heavy weight after carrying it for too long. "I did it," she said quietly, aware of Tommy in the next room. "Told the board on Friday. Submitted my formal resignation yesterday. It's done." Daniel pulled her into a hug, felt her trembling slightly against him. How did they react? Shock, outrage, attempts at negotiation. The chair tried to convince me to take a sabbatical instead, said I was having a breakdown. She pulled back, smiling despite obvious exhaustion. "I told him I was having a breakthrough, that there's a difference." "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Relieved. Like I just jumped off a cliff without knowing if there's water below." She laughed shakily. "But also free. For the first time in 23 years, I'm free." Tommy appeared in the doorway, took one look at Evelyn, and announced, "You look sad. Did something bad happen?" "Something scary happened," Evelyn corrected, crouching to his level. "But also something good. I quit my job so I can spend more time with people I care about." Tommy processed this with his characteristic seriousness. "You quit being a boss?" "I did." "Why?" "Being a boss seems cool." "It is cool. But it was also making me lonely and tired and not very nice to myself." She glanced at Daniel, then back to Tommy. "Your dad taught me that having people who matter is more important than having an impressive job." "Dad's smart like that," Tommy agreed. "But now what are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. That's the scary part, but also the exciting part." She stood, brushed off her jeans. "What are we making today?" "Homemade pizza," Tommy announced. "Dad bought ingredients and everything. We're going to throw the dough in the air even though he always drops it." "I don't always drop it," Daniel protested. "Yes, you do. But it's funny, so it's okay." They moved to the kitchen, fell into the now familiar rhythm of cooking together. Evelyn had improved dramatically over the past weeks. Her knife skills were competent. She understood heat and timing. She no longer treated ingredients like foreign objects. But more importantly, she'd learned to embrace the mess, to laugh at mistakes, to find joy in the imperfect process of creation. Daniel made pizza dough while Tommy and Evelyn prepared toppings: fresh mozzarella that Evelyn had brought from an Italian market, basil from the plant she'd started growing on her penthouse balcony, vegetables that Tommy chopped with increasing competence under Evelyn's supervision. "Okay, moment of truth," Daniel said, holding up a ball of dough. "Pizza toss. Who wants to try?" "You first," Evelyn said, "so we can see the proper technique." "The proper technique is dropping it and pretending it was intentional," Tommy helpfully explained. Daniel threw the dough anyway, managed 2 successful tosses before it landed partially on his head, draping across his face like an extremely temporary hat. Tommy dissolved into giggles. Evelyn laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter. "See? Told you," Tommy said. "Your turn," Daniel said to Evelyn, peeling dough off his forehead. She took the ball of dough nervously. "I'm going to be terrible at this." "That's the point," Daniel said. "Being terrible together is how we have fun." Evelyn tossed the dough, tentatively, carefully, the way she probably approached everything. It barely left her hands, falling back into her palms in a sad lump. She tried again, this time with more confidence, managed a small rotation before catching it. "I did it!" Her delight was disproportionate to the achievement, but genuine. "Again," Tommy encouraged. She tried a third time, threw harder, lost control. The dough sailed past her reaching hands and landed directly on Tommy's head. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Tommy pulled the dough off, looked at it, and started laughing with the pure, unself-conscious joy of childhood. "I've been dough'd," he announced, which only made Evelyn laugh harder. They assembled pizzas together, Tommy creating a geometric pattern with pepperoni. Evelyn carefully arranging basil leaves, Daniel managing the oven and trying to prevent disaster. The kitchen was chaos. Flour everywhere, cheese on the floor, sauce splattered on the counter, but it was joyful chaos, the kind that only happened when people stopped worrying about perfection and just existed together. While the pizzas baked, they sat at the small table, the afternoon light slanting through windows, making the modest apartment look almost beautiful. "Tommy, I need to tell you something," Daniel said, choosing his words carefully. "Evelyn and I, we're becoming more than just friends. We care about each other in a special way. Like how I cared about your mom, but different. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Tommy looked between them, processing. "You mean like boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Something like that, yes." "Okay." He seemed remarkably unfazed. "Are you going to get married?" "We haven't talked about that," Daniel said, glancing at Evelyn, who looked simultaneously terrified and hopeful. "This is still new. We're figuring it out." "But you love each other?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "I love your dad very much, and I care about you very much too." Tommy considered this seriously. "Are you going to try to be my new mom?" "No," Evelyn said firmly. "Your mom was special and important, and no one could ever replace her. I'm not trying to be your mom. I'm just—" She looked to Daniel for help. "She's just Evelyn," Daniel said. "Someone who cares about us and wants to be part of our lives. Someone who makes our family bigger, not different." "Like adding another person to the Lego city," Tommy said, the metaphor making perfect sense in his 8-year-old logic. "It's still the same city, just with more buildings." "Exactly like that," Evelyn agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "Okay, that's good." Tommy returned to his earlier question with characteristic persistence. "But are you going to live here? Because the apartment is pretty small, and I don't think there's room for another person." "We haven't figured out those details yet," Daniel said. "But no matter what changes, you'll always have your room and your space and your dad. Nothing about that changes." "Okay." Tommy seemed satisfied with this answer. "Can we eat pizza now? It smells really good." They ate together, the pizza better than expected despite, or perhaps because of, the chaotic preparation. Conversation flowed easily, Tommy dominating with stories about school and friends, and the ongoing drama of third-grade politics. Evelyn listened with genuine interest, asked questions, treated his concerns with the same seriousness she'd probably once given to board meetings. Daniel watched them interact. This woman who'd been terrified she couldn't connect, and his son who'd lost his mother but somehow found room for another important person. The shape of their family had changed, expanded, become something he never could have predicted on that Christmas Eve when Evelyn had knocked on his door. After dinner, Tommy retreated to his room to work on a new Lego project, leaving Daniel and Evelyn alone at the table. "That went better than I expected," Evelyn said quietly. "He's so accepting, so willing to make space for change. He's had practice. Losing Sarah taught him that life shifts unexpectedly. Sometimes that means loss, but sometimes it means growth." Daniel reached for her hand. "He likes you. Genuinely likes you. That's not nothing. It's everything," Evelyn said. "Being accepted by him, being welcomed into your life, it's more than I ever thought I'd have." She paused, then continued carefully. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Okay." "Do you think I'm making a mistake? Giving up my career, upending my entire life for a relationship that's only a few months old? Am I being reckless or brave or just desperate?" Daniel thought about how to answer honestly. "I think you're being human. You're making choices based on what you actually want rather than what you think you should want. That's not reckless. That's finally being truthful with yourself." "But what if I regret it? What if I quit Meridian and 6 months from now I realize I've made a terrible mistake?" "Then you'll deal with it. Make adjustments. Find new paths." He squeezed her hand. "Evelyn, there are no guaranteed outcomes. Not in career, not in relationships, not in anything. All you can do is make the best choice with the information you have and trust yourself to navigate whatever comes next." "What if it doesn't work out? Between us, I mean. What if I gave up everything and we still fail?" "Then you'll have still made the right choice," Daniel said firmly. Because you chose yourself. Chose happiness over achievement, connection over control. Even if we don't work out, and I believe we will, you'll still have learned what it means to prioritize your own fulfillment. That's not failure. That's growth. Evelyn nodded slowly, some of the anxiety easing from her expression. I forget sometimes that you've already survived the worst-case scenario. You lost Sarah, you had to rebuild everything, and you did it. You're still here. I am, and you will be too, whatever happens. That's the thing about being human. We're more resilient than we think. He pulled her gently toward him. But for what it's worth, I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to figure this out. Messily, imperfectly, but successfully. You sound very confident. I'm not confident at all. I'm terrified. But I'm also committed. To you, to us, to building whatever comes next. He kissed her forehead. We're in this together, Evelyn, for however long it takes to get it right. She rested her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that for a while, comfortable in silence, aware they'd crossed yet another threshold. In the next room, Tommy was singing to himself, some made-up song about dinosaurs and space travel, his voice high and sweet and completely unself-conscious. I could get used to this, Evelyn said quietly. This quiet, this peace, this sense of belonging somewhere that matters. You belong here, Daniel said simply, with us, for as long as you want. Well, what if I want forever? The question hung in the air, enormous and terrifying and somehow exactly right. Daniel thought about forever, about the years ahead, about raising Tommy, about building a life with someone who'd learned to be vulnerable, who'd chosen connection over achievement, who loved him despite and because of all his complications. Then we'll figure out forever, he said, one day at a time, together. Evelyn lifted her head, met his eyes. I'm going to hold you to that. Good, please do. She kissed him then, properly this time, not the tentative promise from the car, but something deeper, more certain. A commitment to trying, to staying, to building something real despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. When they pulled apart, Tommy was standing in the doorway, watching with interest but no apparent distress. Are you guys going to be gross all the time now? He asked. Probably, Daniel admitted. Is that going to be a problem? Tommy considered it. As long as you don't do it during meals. That would be weird. Fair enough, no being gross during meals. Okay. Can Evelyn help me with my Lego spaceship? I need someone with long arms to reach the tall parts. I'd be honored, Evelyn said seriously. Tommy grabbed her hand, dragged her toward his room, chattering about the specifications for his spacecraft. Daniel watched them go, this brilliant woman who ran corporations, and this 8-year-old who thought she existed primarily to help with construction projects, and felt his chest expand with something that might have been joy. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Dying to meet this mysterious Evelyn. Any chance of a family dinner soon? Daniel typed back, soon, just need to prepare you for the fact that she's kind of extraordinary. Rachel's response came quickly. If she makes you happy, she's already extraordinary in my book. The evening settled into easy rhythms. Daniel cleaning the kitchen, Evelyn helping Tommy with increasingly elaborate Lego constructions, the three of them existing together in the casual intimacy that defined real family. When it was Tommy's bedtime, Evelyn hung back, unsure of her role. You can say goodnight if you want, Daniel told her. He'd probably like that. So she did, standing awkwardly in Tommy's doorway while Daniel supervised toothbrushing in pajamas, then approaching the bed where Tommy was already snuggled under his dinosaur comforter. Good night, Tommy, she said softly. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. It was one of the best days I've had in a very long time. You're welcome. Good night, Evelyn. He paused, then added with the casual generosity of children, You can come back whenever you want. You're part of the Lego City now. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. That means more than you know. Daniel read Tommy a chapter from his current book, something about dragons and courage, then kissed his forehead and turned out the light. When he returned to the living room, Evelyn was standing at the window, looking at the city lights, wiping at her eyes. You okay? He asked. I'm wonderful. I'm. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, but smiling. I didn't know this existed. Family dinners and Lego spaceships and being welcomed into someone's life like it's the most natural thing in the world. I spent 42 years thinking I didn't need this. I was so wrong. Daniel crossed to her, pulled her into an embrace. You have it now. For as long as you want it. Forever, she said against his chest. I want it forever. Then it's yours. They stood like that for a long time. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd chosen connection over safety, who'd decided that being human, with all its mess and risk and vulnerability, was worth attempting. Evelyn left around 10, kissing Daniel goodbye at the door with the ease of someone who knew she'd be back. As she walked down the hallway toward the elevator, she turned back one more time. I love you, she said. I know I said it before, but I need you to hear it again. I love you. And I'm not running away from that anymore. I love you too, Daniel said, and I'm not letting you run away, even if you tried. She smiled, blew him a kiss, disappeared around the corner. Daniel closed the door, leaned against it, processed the impossible reality of what his life had become. 3 months ago, he'd been sitting alone on Christmas Eve, convinced that survival was the best he could hope for. Now he had Evelyn, had the promise of something real and lasting, had evidence that life could hold more than just getting through each day. He checked on Tommy one more time, his son sleeping peacefully, surrounded by Lego creations and dinosaur posters, secure in the knowledge that his world was expanding rather than fracturing. Then Daniel got ready for bed, climbed under covers that had felt too empty for too long, and allowed himself to feel something he'd been afraid to acknowledge. Hope. The weeks that followed brought exactly the chaos Evelyn had predicted. The announcement of her resignation hit the business press like a bomb. Speculation about her reasons, analysis of Meridian's future, endless commentary about what it meant when successful women stepped down from power. There were rumors, of course, whispered suggestions about breakdowns or health issues or secret scandals. The board named an interim CEO, began the formal search for her replacement, handled the transition with corporate efficiency that erased her presence with remarkable speed. Evelyn weathered it with more grace than she'd expected. She showed up for the required transition meetings, handed over responsibilities methodically, declined to explain her reasons beyond the official statement about pursuing personal interests. Let them speculate. Let them judge. Their opinions no longer defined her worth. What defined her worth now was Sunday dinners with Daniel and Tommy. Was Thursday lunches that expanded to include Daniel's sister and her family. Was slowly moving her belongings from the penthouse she'd never inhabited to Daniel's small apartment. The two of them figuring out how to share space, how to navigate each other's habits and quirks, and the small irritations that came with actual intimacy. It wasn't always easy. Evelyn struggled with not having a corporate structure to organize her days. Daniel struggled with sharing his carefully ordered life with someone whose presence disrupted familiar routines. They argued about small things, how to load the dishwasher, whether Tommy should have more screen time, whose job it was to remember when they were out of milk. But they also laughed more than either of them had in years, celebrated small victories, Evelyn's first successful pot roast, Tommy's perfect score on his spelling test, Daniel's promotion to facilities manager after his boss retired. Built traditions, movie nights on Fridays, farmers market trips on Saturday mornings, the standing Sunday dinner that became the anchor of their week. By spring, Evelyn's penthouse had sold, the proceeds donated to scholarship funds in her parents' names. She'd taken on consulting work, selective projects that interested her, working on her own terms, maintaining connection to the business world without letting it consume her. She was teaching a seminar at the business school she'd attended, sharing hard-won wisdom with students who reminded her uncomfortably of her younger self. And she was happy. Not perfectly, not without moments of doubt or nostalgia for the certainty of her old life, but genuinely, sustainably happy in a way she'd never experienced before. One evening in late May, nearly 6 months after Christmas Eve, Daniel came home to find Evelyn and Tommy in the kitchen, covered in flour, attempting to make bread from scratch. The kitchen looked like a disaster zone, but they were laughing, working together with the easy collaboration of people who'd grown comfortable with each other. What's all this? Daniel asked. We're learning to make sourdough, Tommy announced. Evelyn says it's really hard, but we're being brave. It's possibly the most temperamental food I've ever attempted, Evelyn added, wiping flour from her cheek. The starter alone required a week of maintenance, but we're committed. Daniel kissed her hello, ruffled Tommy's hair, surveyed the chaos with affection rather than anxiety. How can I help? Just watch, Tommy said. We've got this, probably. So Daniel sat at the kitchen table, watched the two most important people in his life work together on something that would probably turn out imperfectly, but would be made with love and effort and the willingness to try. The bread might not rise properly, the texture might be wrong, but the attempt mattered more than the outcome. Later that night, after Tommy was asleep and the kitchen was somewhat restored to order, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the couch together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, comfortable in silence. I've been thinking, Evelyn said eventually, about the future, about what comes next for us. And I want to make this permanent, official. I want to marry you, Daniel. I want to be Tommy's stepmom, legally and practically. I want to stop calling this your apartment and start calling it our home. She lifted her head to look at him directly. I want forever, exactly like we talked about. Is that something you want too? Daniel felt his heart hammering, aware they were standing at yet another threshold. Marriage, official family, the final dissolution of the boundaries between their separate lives. It should have terrified him. Instead, it felt inevitable, right, the natural culmination of everything they'd been building. Yes, he said simply. I want that too. All of it. Really? Really? He kissed her gently. But I have one condition. What's that? We tell Tommy together. Make sure he's okay with it. This affects him as much as us. Of course. Absolutely. She paused. Do you think he will be? Okay with it? I think he'll be thrilled. He's been asking when you're moving in permanently. I think marriage is just the formalization of what he already considers reality. They told Tommy the next morning over breakfast. Pancakes that Evelyn had learned to make without burning, the three of them sitting at the small table that had become the center of their family life. Tommy, Evelyn and I want to ask you something important, Daniel began. We're thinking about getting married, about officially becoming a family, the three of us together. How would you feel about that? Tommy looked between them, processing with his characteristic seriousness. Would Evelyn live here all the time then, not just on Sundays? Yes, Evelyn said, if that's okay with you. Would you still be my dad's girlfriend, or would you be my stepmom? I'd be your stepmom, but only if you're comfortable with that. We can figure out what you want to call me, what role you want me to have. Tommy thought about it, ate a bite of pancake, then announced with 8-year-old pragmatism, okay, but we need a bigger apartment. There's no room for all of Evelyn's stuff here. Daniel and Evelyn looked at each other, started laughing. Leave it to Tommy to cut through the emotion to the practical reality. You're absolutely right, Evelyn said. We do need a bigger apartment. Want to help us look for one? Can I have a bigger room with space for more Legos? You can have a bigger room with space for more Legos, Daniel confirmed. Then yes, let's get married and get a bigger apartment. In that order. Tommy returned to his pancakes, the matter settled in his mind. They were married in early September in a small ceremony at City Hall. Just Daniel, Evelyn, Tommy, Rachel, and her family, and a handful of friends who'd witnessed their unlikely journey. Evelyn wore a simple dress, no diamonds, her hair loose, looking more herself than she ever had in corporate boardrooms. Daniel wore the one good suit he owned, Tommy in khakis and a button-down, serving as ring bearer with solemn pride. The ceremony was brief, the vows simple, the commitment absolute. When the officiant pronounced them married, Tommy cheered loudly enough to make everyone laugh. Evelyn and Daniel kissed while their small circle of witnesses applauded. And it was perfect precisely because it was unpretentious, honest, real. They moved into a new apartment in October, not huge, not in the luxury buildings Evelyn could have afforded, but comfortable, with space for all of them and the life they were building. Tommy got his bigger room. Daniel got an actual home office. Evelyn got a kitchen large enough to accommodate her expanding culinary ambitions. They painted walls together, assembled furniture, argued about where things should go, gradually transformed the empty space into home, not through perfection or professional decorating, but through the accumulated debris of actual living. Tommy's artwork on the refrigerator, photos from their small wedding, the Lego constructions that multiplied across every available surface. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after Christmas Eve, they sat together on their new couch, bigger than the old one, comfortable enough for all three of them, watching snow fall outside their window. Tommy was building something elaborate with his newest Lego set, humming to himself. Evelyn was reading a book about organizational psychology, occasionally sharing interesting passages with Daniel. Daniel was just sitting, being present, grateful. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked, noticing his expression. "Just this. How different everything is from a year ago." He reached for her hand. "Last Christmas Eve, I was sitting alone, convinced that survival was the best I could hope for. Now I have you. We have Tommy. We have this life that shouldn't make sense, but somehow does." "I was thinking the same thing," Evelyn admitted. "A year ago, I was running from a gala, terrified and alone, with no idea that knocking on your door would change everything." She leaned against him. "Best panic attack I ever had." "Best Christmas Eve I ever had," Daniel agreed. Tommy looked up from his Legos. "Are you guys being gross again?" "Probably," Evelyn said. "Is that a problem?" "Not really. I'm used to it now." He returned to his construction. "But can we make those cookies again? The ones we made last year? They were really good." "We can absolutely make those cookies," Daniel said. "Want to do it tonight?" "Yes, Evelyn, you're way better at cookies now than you used to be. You probably won't mess them up." "High praise," Evelyn said, laughing. "Let's go make some cookies." They migrated to the kitchen together, the three of them, this improbable family built from loneliness and loss and the courage to try again. Daniel watched Evelyn and Tommy work together, measuring ingredients, debating decoration strategies, laughing at small disasters. The scene was chaotic and imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. Sarah would have liked Evelyn, he thought suddenly, would have appreciated her honesty, her willingness to be vulnerable, her genuine love for Tommy, would have been grateful that Daniel had found someone who made him remember what happiness felt like. The thought brought bittersweet peace, not erasing Sarah's memory, but making space for new love alongside old grief. "Dad, you're not helping," Tommy complained. "You're just standing there looking weird." "Sorry, just thinking." Daniel joined them at the counter, took the mixing spoon Evelyn offered, added himself to the familiar chaos. They made cookies together, the same recipe from a year ago, but everything about the process transformed by experience and practice and the accumulated comfort of repetition. The cookies turned out better this time, golden and perfect, arranged on a plate with the care of people who'd learned that small rituals mattered. Later, after Tommy was asleep and the kitchen was clean and the apartment settled into nighttime quiet, Daniel and Evelyn stood at the window looking at the city, the same city where they'd both been lonely, both been lost, both been convinced that survival was sufficient. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly, "for answering the door that night, for seeing me, for being patient while I figured out how to be human." "Thank you," Daniel countered, "for being brave enough to knock, for choosing this life over the easier one, for loving us." "Always," she promised, "for as long as forever lasts." They stood together in the quiet, aware that nothing about their story was conventional or predictable or safe, but it was real, built on honesty and vulnerability and the willingness to risk everything for connection that mattered, built on late-night confessions and homemade cookies and the understanding that being human required courage. Outside, snow continued falling, covering the city in quiet white. Inside, their small family slept peacefully, Tommy dreaming of dinosaurs, Evelyn and Daniel holding each other in the darkness, grateful for the unlikely grace that had brought them together. Christmas Eve had started with a knock at midnight, a terrified CEO seeking safety with a maintenance supervisor who barely knew her. It had ended with a family, a home, and the profound understanding that the most important journeys often begin in moments of crisis and vulnerability, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to be seen exactly as we are, imperfect, frightened, desperately hoping for connection, and to trust that someone else will see that honesty and choose to stay anyway. That was the real story, not about success or achievement or impressive accomplishments, but about two lonely people who found each other in the darkness and decided that being human together was worth every risk. And it was. It absolutely was.